Buenas and half a day. The Committee on Environment, Revenue, Taxation, and Procurement is now called to order. For the record, it is Wednesday, March 13th, 2019. The time is 9 a.m. Notice of this morning's public hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and the local media on March 6, 2019 to meet the 5-day notice, and March 11, 2019 to meet the 48-hour notice, thus meeting the requirements of the open government law. I would like to acknowledge the senators who have joined me today. To my left is Senator Tello Taitugui, and good morning. And to my right is Senator Therese Terlahi. Thank you for joining me. So the purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony on several items. The first item is the executive appointment of Mr. John Edward G. Elau to serve as member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. The second item on the agenda is Bill number 8-35LS, sponsored by Senator Tello Taitugui, relative to commercial leasing of public real property and related facilities. The third item on the agenda is Bill number 25-35, CORE, sponsored by Senator Tello Taitugui, relative to applying the ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel standard to all diesel fuel used in Guam. The fourth item on the agenda is Bill number 27-35, CORE, sponsored by Senator Therese Terlahi and co-sponsored by Clint Rigel and myself, relative to timely publication of all notices of violations, orders of compliance, notices of defense, voluntary compliance agreements, and settlement agreements and referrals to the Office of the Attorney General for prosecution issued by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and to require all of the above be reported to the Guam Environmental Protection Agency Board of Directors. The last item on the agenda is Bill number 46-35, CORE, sponsored by Senator James C. Moylan, relative to increasing the enforcement and collection efforts from lodging facilities who accommodate transient visitors. So before people disperse, I just want to remind everybody that the committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. on Monday, March 18, 2019. Please address testimony to myself, Senator Sabina Perez, Chairperson on the Committee on the Environment, Revenue, Taxation, and Procurement, or it can be dropped off to the mailboxes here at the legislature or emailed to office@senatorperez.org. So welcome everybody to the legislature, and I just want to thank everybody who has come out here today to testify for any of the items on the agenda. So to begin with, I'd like to invite the nominee and anyone who has come forward to testify regarding the nomination of Mr. John Edward G. Elau as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. So I would like to invite Mr. Elau, as well as Jaleesa Tovis, Anthony Villena, and excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Kelu Kichichu. Is there anybody else who would like to testify orally? Okay. All right. So thank you for being here this morning, and thank you to everyone here. So sorry, I don't have your name. Is there a list? 1, 2, 3. Okay. There's one more person. Okay, so let's begin. So if you would like to introduce yourself, Mr. Elau.
Hofday. For the record, my name is John Edward G. Elau. Before I begin, I wanted to first clarify with the members of the committee and the media as well, because I know there have been a lot of confusion these past couple of weeks on which John Elau was being appointed to the ABC board. Currently on Guam, there are 3 John Elaus, so it's a common mistake. But just wanted to make sure that you guys are getting the right one. I want to first thank the chair of the Committee on Environment, Revenue, and Taxation, and Procurement, Senator Sabina Perez, and the rest of the members present today. I am truly humbled and honored to have been nominated and appointed by Governor Lulian Guerrero and Lieutenant Governor Joshua Tenorio to the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, and to have the opportunity, if confirmed, to serve the people of Guam. I am the proud son of Eduardo and Jenny Elau. I was born and raised here on Guam, and at an early age, I was introduced to our family business, JMI Edison, which has been doing business on Guam for the past 40 years. During the summer breaks of high school, my dad would have us work at the company and perform tasks such as learning how to rewind motors and understand the basic functions of the business. I graduated from Father Duenas Memorial High School in 2012, and I went on to further my education at the University of Portland and graduated with a degree in business in 2016. During that time, I interned at the Bank of Guam and ASC Trust Corporation, where I got to learn more about the finance and banking industry, trying to figure out what I wanted to be and who I was going to become. After college, I worked in a sales position at ADT Security Services and Werner Enterprises. And although my time there was short, I gained a lot of knowledge in the trade of sales and really appreciated the art of rejection. Accepting rejection in any line of work is key to any successful businessman or woman. My determination to become a better professional and even better person kept me going door to door through the cold winters of Portland, Oregon. What I learned, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. Today, I'm the manager of Agree Aircon Depot, a sister company to JMI Edison, and formerly known as Appliance Galleria or the old Sears. With my sales experience and the materials I've learned in college, and with the guidance from my father and Uncle John, and among other colleagues, I feel I've become an effective manager, but there's still more to learn and improve on. Since I've been back on island, I've become a member of the Guam Contractors Association and the youngest member of the Rotary Club of Northern Guam. I strive to provide service to my community and meet as much people along the way. I'm also attending the GCA Trades Academy HVAC course, where I'm currently in level 2 of 4 levels. So why accept my nomination to the ABC board? I believe it is a testament to the administration's goals to have the next generation of leaders and businessmen and women be a part of such boards, to learn, to grow, to understand, to collaborate, and to make good decisions. These are the characteristics I envision myself doing if I'm confirmed to the board. I will bring an open mind and seek a fair and just decision with the board. One of the many things my father has taught me is that every day you're a student. Doesn't matter how old you are, how much money you make, it's the things you learn from others and information you can obtain that'll make you successful. And that's what brings me here today. I am a student, young and ready and eager to learn, and with your confirmation, I will hold myself to a high standard of professionalism and ethics and respect the letter of the law to serve the people of Guam. Thank you. Situus Masi. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ilau, and we do look forward to the younger generation taking some leadership roles. I just also want to add, just for the public's interest, the ABC board is responsible for issuing licenses for manufacturers of alcohol, distributors, applicants of serving establishments, and temporary events. They have the power to revoke the licenses issued due to noncompliance with the rules and regulations. So I just want to make that known. All right, thank you. So the next person I would like to have testify is Ms. Torres.
Hafaday and good morning, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in the appointment of John Edward Ilau as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. My name is Jaleesa Torres, resident of Talafofo, employee at Agree Aircon Depot, and student at the GCA Trades Academy. I've had the great privilege of working with John since he gave me the opportunity to work as an HVAC technician in training at Agree Aircon Depot back in October 2018. Though I have not completed my full certification, working with John has been a tremendous learning experience in both my trade and in business management. As a manager, he pushes me to step out of my comfort zone and hone in on my customer relations and sales skills. He is currently taking classes at the GCA Trades Academy, which shows his commitment to understand the trade himself. These are qualities found not in just good managers, but in great leaders. With all the extra responsibility of running a business and still going to school, John makes time for family and community service. In the short time I've known him, he's carried himself with the highest standard of fairness and professionalism, and I believe he will be an excellent addition to the ABC board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Moreland, who has joined us today. Thank you, Senator. All right, so next on the list, we have Mr. Villena.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson Sabina Perez, as well as the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation and Procurement, for the opportunity to submit testimony on the appointment of John Edward G. Elau to the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. For the record, my name is Anthony Villena, most know me as Tony, and I fully support the appointment of John Edward G. Elau to become a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. I met John a little over 5 years ago when I began courting his sister, Geraldine. At the time our paths met, he was still an undergrad at the University of Portland, and I was still attending graduate school at Hawaii Pacific University. He was visiting several of his family members in Hawaii during one of his breaks, and I had the pleasure of sharing a common close friendship with one of his relatives. The day we met, he instantly treated me with the same respect that you would an older brother that you had known for years. Oddly enough, I was not even dating his sister yet. This alone speaks volumes about his character and how he carries himself. Flash forward to 2019, we've grown closer than ever. We shared many Christmas celebrations, a few birthdays, family gatherings, car rides, family trips, and yes, as many brothers do, the occasional bickering and poking fun at each other's athletic abilities or debating whose football or basketball team is the best. No matter how much we agreed to disagree, John has always carried himself with humility and treated me with the utmost respect any person can ask for. As an older brother, there really is nothing more that you can be proud of. Many of his family members will agree when I say, John is a man of respect. There is no doubt in my mind he will respect the integrity and the position that he will hold if you confirm his appointment. Probably known around his peers and teammates as a great basketball player, John usually plays the position of point guard when dribbling the basketball around the court in many of the island's top basketball leagues, past and present. This position is often granted to the best leader and the best passer of the basketball team. The position requires great poise under pressure, often making key decisions in critical parts of the game, fierce leadership, unyielding determination, and most of all, complete selflessness. Many of the other fantastic point guards who have shared the basketball court with him may or may not openly say it, but they will one way or another agree that John possesses all of these qualities. I believe in my heart that he will apply all of these positive qualities of performing under pressure, leadership, determination, and selflessness to his position on the ABC board, should he be confirmed. Throughout these years, I've gotten to know John and have grown with him. I've seen him take on more and more responsibility as a young adult in his professional and his personal life. He has exhibited exemplary determination and ambition to take on many of life's challenges as they present themselves to him, a virtue that his supporters should be proud of. Never afraid to say things as it is, his frankness gives him a charming effect that allows you to appreciate his willingness to listen when it's your turn to express your thoughts, an ability gifted only to those matured individuals who are humble and confident to seek such a skill. Often stern in sticking to what he believes in, John is no stranger to adversity and making tough decisions. As many of our business community leaders know, managing a small business is no easy feat and requires long hours, perseverance, and an ability to get things done. As the manager at Agree Aircon Depot, a local family-owned small business, John has done a great job leading his team to get things done. In that same breath, John is open-minded and willing to brainstorm ideas together to find the best possible solution to a common problem. He intently listens to the ideas of others and offers his thoughts when he has something to contribute. This is the epitome of a productive team member. I'm glad to have him on my team, and I believe that the ABC board would also gain a good teammate in John. Madam Chairperson Sabina Perez and the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation and Procurement, there is no doubt that the ABC Board will be receiving a great candidate for their duties and their responsibilities. I truly believe John Edward would carry out his duties and responsibilities as a member of the ABC Board with these positive qualities that he has worked for his whole life and that I have mentioned. I humbly ask that you positively vote in favor of my brother, John Edward G. Ilau, as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. I'm available for any questions that you may have, and thank you for your time and respect.
Thank you, Mr. Villena, for your words and taking the time out today. So the next on the list is Kelu Kichuchu.
Good morning, Senators of the committee. My name is Kalen Kichuchu. I've known Mr. John Edward Grape Ilau for about 11 years. I know we're young, but in those 11 years, I've come to know an honest man, a responsible man who's put the responsibility of his friends, or toward his friends and toward his family, before that of himself. And I have no doubt that that will extend to the greater island community if confirmed to the board. Let me see. All right. And in that, I have the utmost confidence for him to serve in such a capacity. And if given the chance, I'm certain that you also, everyone in here and the island of Guam, would share in that confidence. Also, again, since we are young, I believe it's key to have a young face, a young voice to properly represent us in decisions that would obviously affect us down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kichuchu. So on the next one is reading a testimony on behalf of Wayne Santos, I believe. Yes, if you can introduce yourself. Thank you.
For the record, my name is Romeo Orlando. I'm here to deliver Jack Taitagi's testimony in favor of John Edward Ilau's appointment to the ABC Board. Madam Chair, I am writing this letter in support of John Edward Ilau's appointment to the ABC Board. I have been acquainted with John since his senior year in high school through my relationship with his father. I had seen one of his basketball games when he played for FD and once met him at his father's 50th birthday party. What impressed me was that he was very respectful and took the time to sit down and encourage us and give us his time without making us feel there was somewhere else he would rather be. That always impressed me. Since December 2017, I've had the pleasure of working closely together with John in his current position at Agree Aircon Depot. In that time, I've had the opportunity to get to know him both professionally and personally. I have seen him deal with both customers and staff and can attest to his integrity in dealing with each situation. At the end of the day, his desire is not simply to do what is fair, which is the bare minimum, but rather to do what is right. I have seen it in his dealings with his customers as well, and his dealing with his staff. Because John has this attitude of doing what is right, I am certain he would take that mindset to the ABC Board. So many of our young people leave for the seeming allure of the States, never to be seen from again. What I see in John is that Guam is his home. He cares about what happens here and would like to make a difference. You would be very lucky to have him. Sincerely, Jack Taitagi.
Thank you so much. And we do have another person here has come here to testify, Mr. Troy Torres. You can come to the front.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senator, best wishes to your sister. I hope she's doing fine. My name is Troy Torres. I'm here to testify more in opposition to the nomination of John Ilau, I suppose, depending upon the investigation that the legislature does, that I hope the legislature does into his financial affairs. I do not know Mr. Ilau. I've never met him. Oh, thank you. I've never met him, and I'm certain he doesn't know me. But I am aware and I am witness to, and again, I welcome the Attorney General and the United States Attorney to depose me based on my testimony today of illegal conduct and illegal contractual dealings of his family, Ed and John Elau, during the Calvo administration. And I just hope that as the legislature is committed to the fight against public corruption, corporate corruption perhaps being a dime a dozen in the disgusting basket that is corporate or political corruption, that the legislature does its due diligence in investigating Mr. Elau's financials to discover whether any of Mr. Elau's wealth was gotten from any of the contracts from GPA, GMH, or the one they tried to get at the port in his financials. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. I'd like to open up the floor to my colleagues for questions. I would start with my right, with Senator Therese Tulahi.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all of you who testified. I appreciate your testimony. And I do have a few questions. And so, Mr. Elau, thank you for accepting this nomination. I don't believe that your youth, I'm calculating, and it looks like you graduated 6 years ago from high school. Is that correct?
7.
7 years.
7, yeah.
All right, thank you. And so I don't believe that youth is, your age is an impediment. I think I agree with the chairperson, Senator Perez, that, you know, we welcome young people to serve on these boards and to provide fresh input, as some of you have testified, and to, you know, be bold, lead the government boldly, hopefully. But I do know that you will be serving on this board with other people who are older. And I guess I just want to ask you directly, will you be able to assert yourself, despite your youth, in comparison to the other board members?
Senator Tulahi, thank you so much for your question. I believe I read the law the other day, and I think the bare minimum of age requirement is 25.
Yes.
So luckily I met that age requirement. But in my dealings, I mean, with Agree Aircon Depot, every day I deal with residents much older than I am. I know in the board capacity, it's more of a professional sense, and I believe I'll be able to hold myself to a high standard and assert myself in whatever I believe. My goal there, obviously I want to learn, meet the other board members, get to know them better, and then see how we can collaborate to make the best decision.
All right, this board has a huge power. It's actually, the board members are going to be deemed peace officers, and with the power of seizure of illegal importations and actual materials, right? And they have the power to enter premises, they have the power to look at books and records. And so I think that's a huge power for board members. The board is supposed to prevent the loss of tax revenue from illegal importation and ensure that we are, you know, collecting the taxes that are due to the government of Guam through appropriate accounting of imports and sales of alcohol. You're also going to have the power to revoke licenses or enforce penalties. And so I want to know if any of your current business, your family's well-known, successful business, so I commend you for that. But I want to know if your business interests or your friendships in these relationships may influence your decisions on this board.
No, I don't believe there's no conflict of interest with any, of any of my friends or business dealings.
All right. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to
Yes,
to
sorry.
put you in that situation now, because it's going to be tough. You're going to be sitting around a board with people who will say, oh, we've been doing this way for years, and we want you to go in there and be able to assert yourself and to be able to suggest new ways of doing things that will be more effective for the government of Guam. I noticed in the packet that under the part where you're supposed to list financial interests in business, there is none. And so I just want to clarify that. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Tulahi. I would like to also acknowledge Senator Vice Speaker Talina Nelson, who has joined us today. Thank you. So we will continue the line, any kind of questions from my colleagues. So I would like to recognize Senator Talo-Taitagui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, John, for coming up and stepping up to the plate. For someone as young as you, I'm sure there's other things you can do. There's 3 good friends right next to you. You guys can be doing something a lot more fun than having to, you know, be the eyes and the ears out there, especially in some areas like the clubs that you go to. But so I hope that you do keep a keen eye out there. And during the board's gatherings that you take an interest. I noticed that you said you have your business sense from your uncle and your father. But what I'm banking on is your ethics and your sense of responsibility, which I'm sure you got from your mother. That's what I'm banking on.
For sure.
You should have had her name in this testimony. So she's a great guiding hand, and I wish you the very best. And always know that if you have any questions or anything concerns being on this board that need to address on a legislative level, please feel free. The door is always open to each and every one of us here. Good luck to you. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. I would like to move on to Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Law, congratulations on your nominations. I'm glad you stepped up to the plate and accepted the governor's request. So that's a good thing. If you are accepted to that position, I see you as energetic and ready to work hard, and you're going to help out our island there. So if you had to stay up late at night, you probably will have the energy to do that. So thank you so much for accepting the position. Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. I'd like to open the floor to Vice Speaker Talina Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I came in a little bit late, but I was listening to your nomination on the way here, the testimony. So I'd like to thank your friends and your family for coming out. I think you're the brother-in-law, no? Are you guys married yet? Soon? But no, I want to thank you for your courage to it's not easy, especially at that age, to come out and give testimony. I know I was very reluctant when I was much younger to do it as well. So thank you. But there is one question I want to ask, just to, you know, kind of clear the muddy water. Mm-hmm. There was a question brought up about contracts with GMH and GPA. And so just, have you had any contracts with GPA and GMH?
So my line of business, I manage an air conditioning business. And we've had, we handled last year the AC maintenance for Temis mm-hmm. and Cabras. But other than that, nothing with GMH.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right. And everything was done in accordance with the board process?
Yes, ma'am. Bid
okay.
and everything.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm very impressed with your testimony and also the fact that how young you are and you're willing to step up to the plate. I do want to say that there are some challenges when you are surrounded by a lot of older, well-established community members, especially when you serve as a member of the board. Mm-hmm. But I want to encourage you to be stern, like one of your friends mentioned, and to, if you know something is right, then do the right thing. It's not always easy. You may receive some admonishment, but it's something that if you go to bed at night, it's something, am I okay? Can I rest well? And I want to encourage you to also have that sternness and that willingness to do the right thing, to also remind those that you are surrounded with on the board that, you know, we serve the people of Guam. And I want to thank you for having the courage to come up and be in this kind of scrutiny. So we look forward to your appointment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Speaker.
Thank you.
So is there anyone else who would like to testify? So I just want to thank you, Mr. Ilau, for coming out here, and all the public that has given testimony, and all your family that has come out to support you. I just also want to reinforce what you said, that, you know, in your testimony, you said that you would hold yourself to a high standard of professionalism and ethics. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. Considering that we're in such a small community, there's a lot of pressure, you know, making decisions. So, you know, we do want to support you in that effort. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we would like to move to the next agenda item. Thank you so much for being here. All right, thank you so much. So we would like to move on to Bill 8-35 LS, sponsored by Senator Tello Taitigui, relative to commercial leasing of public real property and related facilities. I would like to ask my colleague, the sponsor of the bill, to give an introduction.
Okay. Hafa and good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for scheduling this public hearing on Bill 8-35, which seeks to adjust the number of years of commercial contract, lease, permit, or license for use of public real property and related facilities by a non-government person or entity shall be solicited, negotiated, entered into, or made from a period of 5 years to a period of 10 years. Madam Chair, Bill 8-35 was introduced recognizing some of the arguments presented to a legislatura several years during the discussion on Bill 69-32, which established the current 5-year lease period restriction. Representatives from the affordable housing industry, the Port of Guam, and GIDA shared their concerns and oppositions to Bill 69-32. Mr. Carlos Camacho of Micronesian Development Corporation shared during the public hearing on Bill 69-32 that the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, at the time, had been putting out multiple requests for proposals to find the best use for their properties, and that the limits imposed by the current 5-year lease period restrictions impedes their ability to bid on commercial development. According to GIDA, the 5-year lease period restriction does not provide adequate time for developers to realistically make a return on investment of the land leased and building construction. Excuse me.
Gita further argued that if a developer needed financing through a bank, which is the case for most local developers, it would be highly unlikely any financial institute would finance the construction on land the developer may not have control of or rights to in 5 years. And that such a requirement may hurt local businesses that need realistic lease terms in order to develop property. Madam Chair, in its testimony, the Port of Guam made it clear that the 5-year lease period limit has proven to be a double-edged sword because many major commercial developments are discouraged from leasing because 5 years is not enough time to realize long-term return on their investment. The Port of Guam further argued that despite the well-meaning, exceptional term contracts beyond 5-year provisions, from a practical business perspective, it has become clear over the years that investors are concerned about the uncertainty of the legislative approval process, and this in turn has had a chilling effect. And despite having a 5-year lease period authorization already in place since 2001, prior to the current law, Public Law 32-40, passed by the 32nd Guam legislature, which lapsed into law in on June 11, 2013, the Port of Guam testified it has been unable to fully maximize its potential to attract institutional commercial tenants who are willing to invest in a 5-year term or to otherwise subject their investment to a legislative approval process. In closing, Madam Chair, I look forward to the testimony on Bill 8-35 and to make corrections to citations in the bill in addition to any amendments that may be presented at this hearing. Thank you, and Sujus Masi.
Sujus Masi, Senator Taitigui. On the list, we have 2 people that are willing to speak on behalf of this bill. We have Jack Haddock, Executive Director of Tomorrowland Trust Commission, and Joseph Ngunko from the Guam Ancestral Land Commission. So I would like to invite you to give your testimony. My apologies, Senator Tamara. Okay, if you can state your name for the record. Thank you.
Manana Sizus, Torres Samzus Senadora, Zan Senadot, Giimina 35 na legislaturan Guahan, Guahu si Jack Haddock III, Gehilu I Komisyon inangokun tanut tomorrow. Buenas tan Hafade, Chairperson, Honorable Senator Sabina Flores Perez, and distinguished members of the 35th Guam Legislature's Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, and Procurement. I am Jack Haddock III, Administrative Director of the Tomorrowland Trust Commission, and I'm here today to testify on Bill 8-35 LS, an act to amend subsection 5217A of Subarticle C, Article 2, Chapter 5, Division 1, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to commercial leasing of public real property and related facilities. This amendment to the previously mentioned GCA comes from the legislation passed in 2013 in Public Law 32-40, with the intent of establishing, quote, a uniform standard for seeking, quote, to improve transparency and clarity with regards to leasing Government of Guam real property. The Tomorrowland Trust Commission commercial leasing rules and regulations were established subsequently in 2015 by Public Law 33-95, with the clearly expressed intent to, quote, facilitate the leasing of selected CLTC properties for commercial activities in order to begin generating the revenues needed to accomplish land surveys and registration and to provide infrastructure to residential and agricultural land tracts, end quote. It is the Trust's considered opinion that the passage of Public Law 33-95 created an implicit exemption of the specific term limitation established for CLTC commercial leases of public real property created in Public Law 32-40. The Trust would like to take this opportunity to offer an explicit exemption, a single sentence, to the proposed subsection 5127A2 to read, quote, "For commercial leases under the Tomorrowland Trust, the applicable limitation is 25 years as set forth in Title 21, Chapter 75, Guam Code Annotated, subsection 75-122B3. End quote. This language truly provides clarity and prevents confusion among potential government bidders on commercial leasing opportunities for the Trust, as well as other government agencies and entities. It is in this regard that we strongly recommend that the Tomorrowland Trust Commission, the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, and the Guam Economic Development Authority be granted full exemption from the term limitations set forth in this proposed legislation due to the unique responsibilities to their respective constituencies. In a time when the Trust is working hard to maximize its commercial leasing capability because it is the very lifeblood that allows it to fulfill its mandate to our Native people, we humbly ask for your support with regard to the proposed change to this legislation. It is with great courage and pride that I have appeared today before this august body to stand for our Native people and the promise of compassion, dignity, prosperity, and a life of meaning that they so richly deserve. Si Diyos maasi dyan undangkulo na agradecimiento para itempon midzo dyan este na pudidadat pago. Nuevo na hinanaw. Si Diyos maasi.
Si Diyos maasi, Mr. Haddock. So we'd like to hear testimony from Mr. Angonco. If you can please introduce yourself. Is the microphone not working? Oh.
There it is. Good morning, Senators, Vice Chairperson, Vice Chair Senator Talina Nelson, Senator Therese Talai, Senator Taitiwi, Senator Moylan. My name is Joseph Angoko. I am the Executive Director for the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. I am also a descendant of an heir of ancestral lands. I am here basically in support, of the intent of Bill 8-35. However, I would tend to lean in Mr. Haddock's support of full exemption, and also the GIDA's recommendations to remove the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission and Tomorrowland Trust Commission from these restrictions that are in place in regards to commercial leases. Public Law 25-45 that was forwarded by Speaker Antonio Ampinco, and signed into law subsequently by Governor Carlos Gutierrez at the time. That was in June of 1999. Specifically mandated that the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission was tasked with fulfilling many obligations and responsibilities. However, at this point in time, I have seen, I have heard, I have listened to GIDA and many members, all the members actually of the Ancestral Lands Commission Board, and also board members from the Tomorrowland Trust Commission. And that seems to be a hindrance in regards to the restrictions placed in regards to leases, commercial leases. The Ancestral Lands Commission owns property, and I have, I'm sorry I didn't submit it earlier, but I have a listing of Spanish Crown lands of substantial acreage, which could be generating funds specifically for ancestral landowners, and more specifically, in regards to the extinguishment of claims. And I will explain. Landowners such as Mr. Benny Crawford, my family up in Nimitz Hill, which a substantial parcels of property have not been returned, and we do not expect to be returned, okay? Families down in the Sumai Naval Station area and other areas in Tizen. We need to, the Ancestral Lands Commission needs to generate funds, as I've been told by the board members of the Ancestral Lands Commission Board. They have been held up by these restrictions from the legislature. I support the intent of Bill 8-35, but I, along with Mr. Hattick and Gita, would request that this exemption be removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngoko, for your testimony. We'd also like to hear next Mr. Tomata.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to everyone. I have some familiarity with, of course, the issue at hand in Bill 835. I was the one that had actually introduced the bill at the time. I just want to make a couple of points, actually 3 points. One has to do with the duration of the lease term that can be approved under the authority of the agency or the governor alone, or in the case of an autonomous agency, the board of directors. So the way the law reads right now is that a lease can be issued and simply approved, signed off by the governor if it is a term of current law, at least is 5 years or less. In the case of an autonomous agency, the board of directors can approve that, and it doesn't have to go any further. It doesn't have to come down to the legislature for review and approval. Now, the question of, you know, how long is long enough? 5 years, 10 years, 20? That's really a policy call, but we have to recognize that, of course, the shorter the lease term is, then really the revenue generating potential for that property that's going to be leased out for 5 years only is really going to be minimal, because, you know, no big business interest is going to invest any kind of money and expect to get a return on its investment within that 5 year period. So, you know, 5 years maybe be good to build a I don't know, a popsicle stand, right? But if I'm going to build a facility on government land to manufacture and sell and all that, that's going to be a lot greater investment, and likely they won't get the return on that investment within that 5 years. They'll need a longer term. But, you know, it begs the question, how do we start off with 5 years? And I remember at the time when this bill was, when the law was being formulated, I believe Senator Terlahi was the legal counsel at the time, and I had asked, is there a limit in the law right now? And for the life of me, I looked last night and I couldn't find that legislation, but it's somewhere in Guam law that specifies 5 years is really the limit on leases in terms, you know, the terms, right? 5 years at a time. Now, this legislation was actually introduced because of what was happening out there, wherein there was one agency that had basically had a lease for 50 years with an option to renew for another 50 years. And, you know, it was a very long time. We've got examples of like the ITC building. Started out as 5 years with, you know, umpteen options to renew, and 100-year lease, and the rent on it back then when it was put into the lease was nickels and dimes. So, so then what prompted the introduction of the law was, how do we address situations like that? And recognizing that public land are really property of the people, then the legislature needs to get involved in reviewing these leases. So, so when we extend that duration of time of a lease that can be approved solely on the signature of the governor or the signature of the chairman of the board, then the trade-off for that, while we may be able to attract larger investments to maximize the revenue potential of that property, and we're mostly talking about leasing of property, is that we decrease the transparency of the process because, you know, basically you lease it out for the maximum term and hope that you can get a return on investment. So that, unfortunately, is the trade-off. You lengthen the lease term, and you can get in bigger investments, maximize your revenue potential, but you also decrease the transparency process. Now, I've heard the arguments also about, you know, investors saying, throwing up their hands in the air and says, if it has to go down to the legislature, forget it. I'm not going to go there. Well, a good example is Cementon Micronesia down at the port. They came in, they started out that venture, and they took a big risk. And they started out with under the 5-year limitation, and they went ahead and they said, we'll take what we can get. And they made the investments. And they came down to the legislature and asked they calculated that they can get their return on the investment within 20 years. They came down, they made an excellent presentation to the legislature. They walked out of here with a 30-year lease. So to say that, you know, coming down to the legislature is a dead on arrival stuff for a lot of developers, I just don't agree with that. I mean, there's one good example, and all you need is one good example to basically say, well, that's not true. However, since we are dealing with that particular section of the law, the 5217, I think we probably need to go one step further. Instead of just changing the lease term, the minimum lease term from 5 years to 10 or whatever, and that's really a policy call, we really need to take a look at Section 5217D on page 3, because that is where a lease that comes down here to be to seeking approval from the legislature, that's where that lease could actually die. So right now on that 5217D on page 3, if we take a look at on line 10, the first paragraph, we give the law right now gives the legislature 60 calendar days from the date of filing with the speaker. It gives the legislature 60 calendar days. Now, after 18 years in the legislature, I've come to the conclusion the legislature doesn't move that fast. 60 days is not going to be sufficient. I would suggest that we probably increase that time. From the time that that lease is transmitted to the speaker, give the legislature 100 days, 180 days rather, because, you know, they receive it, it gets processed, you got to put out a public hearing, you got to, we got to be realistic. So I'd say if we're going to start tweaking this section of the law, then we also should go ahead and put a more realistic time frame there. So I would recommend that we change there on line 12 from 60 days to 180 calendar days. The one that's really most concerning, though, is line 17 of the bill on subparagraph 3. And the way it reads right now is that the 60-day period allowed for the legislature to approve or disapprove the contract, lease, permit, or license shall be tolled from the time that a public hearing is noticed and until a committee report is completed. So the way that works, my understanding, is that the chairperson of the committee schedules a public hearing. The clock stops. All right? So the chairperson could conceivably schedule a public hearing on day 59. The clock stops. And it does not start again until the committee report is completed. That could be 360 days later. And it dies. So I would recommend that if we're going to continue to toll the time, that maybe we need to put on line 10 a qualifier at the end that says that the time shall be tolled from the time that a public hearing is noticed and until a committee report is completed, but shall not exceed 90 days. So it kind of puts some parameters on the committee that, you know, conduct your public hearing, do your committee report, and report it out of committee within 90 days. And that gives some assurance that this lease that's being reviewed will make its way through for the body to act on. It would be my recommendation that since we're in here now to tweak the law, that section of the law, and improve it, we really should take a look at the process when it comes down to the legislature. So Madam Chair, is my testimony, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Dunkaluna Zuzumasi, Senator Tamata. So I would like to open the floor to my colleagues for questions. We could start. First of all, I want to acknowledge the presence of Senator Regine Biscoli. Thank you for joining us today. So I'd just like to acknowledge Senator Telo Taitugui.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony, everyone. I did speak to Mr. Ngoko beforehand, and you did mention about the your ability to be able to lease property for 25 years based on the testimony from Mr. Hattick. So this gives you guys the ability to lease it for 25 years? And you concurred with any legal counsel with regards to this? Mr. Hattick?
Thank you very much, Senator. So as I mentioned before in my testimony, the rules and regulations with regards to commercial leasing of the trust is a 25-year limit. And obviously, we do run that through our legal counsel before the commission undertakes any lease.
Okay,
for that matter.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So I will definitely take your consideration to exempt you from that.
If I could, Senator, I'm not exactly familiar with the GALC's regulations, but Director Ngoko can probably shed some light as to whether that mirrors, because I noticed you mentioned 25 years for GALC. I cannot confirm something from another agency, but the public law that does govern that agency should have, and if it doesn't, then this would be the great opportunity to make sure that it does happen.
We'll definitely look into that before I move forward and seek legal counsel for that as well. Mr. Ngoko, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Let me clarify here the position I'm taking. As I said earlier, I support the intent of Bill 8-35. However, the GIDA, specifically Mr. Mike Cruz, Larry Tovas, Diego Mendiola, are opti managers. From what I have learned, I've only been in a job a little bit over a month and a half. In a month and a half, I've dealt I've got rules and regulations I'm working with, with Senator Therese Talahi to finally get this agency moving. I am starting up a new agency with 1.5 employees, okay? The biggest holdup we have here is what I am mandated to do under Public Law 25-45, and that is the extinguishment of claims. And one of the modes of extinguishment of claims, paying off landowners, ancestral landowners, that will never, or in very high probability, never receive their properties back from the government of Guam and the federal government and whatever other entity, is they have to be compensated somehow. I am offering an olive branch to finally put closure to this situation. Many of these people, the generation now, their ancestors have passed. They have lost ownership of property since the war and continuously after the war. So how do we extinguish a claim owner, a claimant with the ancestral lands? People have not been able to use their properties in any way, and most specifically to prosper from ownership of their properties because they have been taken away and most likely will never be returned. And so the only way that I can see as the executive director, and I want a recommendation from Gita and my board members, is the long-term leasing of properties. Ancestral lands, and I have a listing here of Spanish Crown lands, which ancestral lands is authorized under law to lease, okay? There are large parcels of property here that can be developed. And this has slept for a long, long time. And I think it is the responsibility of this entire government that these ancestral landowners be finally compensated, okay, by revenues generated from leases.
Thank you, Mr. Ngoko, and I'll make sure I work with the committee chair on ancestral lands to ensure that that you have the ability to move forward in leasing properties to help your agency and have an adequate enough time to do so, or the lease length have time. Senator Atta, you're here in the capacity of
I'm sorry, I'm here in capacity as the manager for the Airport Authority.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You mentioned in your testimony transparency, and I'm a great advocate for transparency, and I do believe that I see the concept in providing that every 5 years to do a cross-check and seeing everything is in order. I truly agree with that, but it also sometimes hinders progress and investment. And I know that the airport has property that they also lease out. And you mentioned that it's just a matter of a signature of the board. So can you tell me the board actually has that authority to sign longer than 5 years for property that you own at the airport?
No, Senator. So a lease agreement, which is right now 5 years or less, the chairman of the board the board can actually approve that lease. But then what would happen, because when you actually lease out the property, that's actually a procurement action. That's why this item is under 5 GCA Chapter 5, which deals with the procurement law. So what would happen then is we can lease, the authority can lease out a property for 5 years. And when that expires, they're going to reissue the lease, then they have to open it out for basically bidding to get the best lease price that you can get. So there's no guarantee that the incumbent is going to be able to continue that lease. So it's not, 5 years later we'll take a look at it, and if everything is good, you're going to get it again. You're going to get it again if you're the highest bidder according to the procurement law. So the second part of 5217 on the commercial leasing issue is that if you want to go for 30 years, so usually lending institutions, I mean, if I'm going to put up anything substantial, I'll probably need to borrow money. And lending institutions will want a lease, will want to see that you have a lease on that property for at least the term of the loan, 30 years. And that's then where the second part of the law comes in, where then we go into this determination of need for an exceptional term contract. Exceptional term, a contract becomes exceptional when it is longer than the 5 years that is currently allowed. And that's then when it comes down to the legislature and it gets scrutinized to make sure that in fact the lease or the lease itself comes down, to make sure that, you know, we don't end up with another situation like what we have with some of the leases that we have, 100 years, and at the 100th year we increase the rent by 15 cents. You know, so.
Well, I'm pretty sure that this bill would not make it 100 years. You know, pushing it up to 10 was a recommendation by several agencies that have property for lease, and finding it very difficult for them to get investors to move forward. But I greatly appreciate your recommendations on some of the amendments to strengthen it, to ensure that this doesn't happen at Guam Airport, and we look forward to also talking to you more extensively about this to make sure that the airport has that ability to attract investors. And thank you so much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. I just also want to add to the record that we received testimony from GITA, from Director Melanie Mendiola, and they did provide us with some additional amendments, or they're seeking additional amendments, and the same line of reasoning as Senator Tom Atta was talking about, and as well as Jack Haddock and Mr. Ngoko, that instead of, but they want to increase the amount of time from, with the law, what our bill says is 10 years, but they want to increase it to 20 years lease period. In addition to that, they want to make exempt commercial leases and licenses under the Tomorrowland Trust, as well as to GITA and the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. An additional amendment they would like to see is in regards to the tolling of time. They mentioned in section, sorry, they would like to amend additionally under the legislative approval section that, quote, if Iles Laturan Guahan takes no action within 60 calendar days from the date of filing with the speaker, the commercial contract, lease, permit, or license shall be deemed approved by Iles Laturan Guahan. So that is another, a third amendment they were proposing. And as far as effective date, they propose that, quote, this act shall become effective upon enactment and shall not affect the transactions that are currently in discussion pursuant to the issuance of an officially published invitation for bid or request for proposal. So these are some additional proposals that GITA is proposing. I would also like to state for the record that we did receive a fiscal note from BBMR as far as the fiscal impacts. So I'd like to state that in their fiscal note, they mentioned most commercial agreements for use of public real property are based on appraised value of the property at the time of agreement and often include a clause for incremental increases. So they say that further, a lengthened term may increase the overall interest for investors to enter into a commercial agreement for use of public property and compound the revenues from rental payments mentioned above. It would also ensure a revenue stream for that amount of time. Conversely, they say, extending the term length means that the base appraised value of the property cannot be reevaluated until the contract, lease, permit, and license has expired. Reevaluation of the property would mean a potential increase to the base appraised value of the property, as well as a potential increase to rental payments associated with the agreement. So I just want to state that for our consideration. This is something that we will be considering as well. I'd like to proceed with my colleagues, Senator James Moylan, if he has any questions. Okay, thank you, Senator. I would like to move to my right, Senator Therese Terlahi, if you have any questions.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today, and I understand the exemption that Tomorrowland Trust is asking for based on another statute that kind of is, allowed them that exemption. Ancestral lands, I understand the rationale. And I want to thank you, especially Senator Ada, for your testimony today. It's very helpful, especially the background of why this type of law was implemented in the first place and your efforts in this regard. I appreciate the intent of the existing law because we did witness very much some bad deals by the government, or what we see to be bad deals years later, and wondered how that was done and why was there not more scrutiny on it? So I very much agree with the intent of the existing law that additional scrutiny is good for the people of Guam, and it can never be bad to have additional scrutiny. I would like to, I understand and I agree with you about the sending it to the legislature. I have not seen the legislature to be an impediment to business. I think I've only been here, this is my second term, but last term I thought was very, very business friendly. And I thought Senator Ada had the land committee and did a very good job of moving land legislation, leases and things like that along, in the public process. And one of the arguments is that boards and commissions should be able to approve these things. But if it's going to receive the scrutiny of a board and the approval of a board, then it stands to reason, at least to my reason, that it should withstand the scrutiny of a legislature. And unfortunately, we have just seen very many cases of the opposite. And so I guess I haven't lived long enough to forget those bad deals. And so I think it's incumbent on us to just protect the government of Guam from bad deals, regardless. And, political interference, anything else that may have contributed to what we now see very clearly was not good value for the government. And I think that I agree that 180 days might be more reasonable if we're going to look at tweaking that statute, but I guess I'm not yet convinced about moving the 5 to the 10 years, and I'll state that right away, because I looked at the intent of the original law, Public Law 32-40, and then 3499. And I think we can improve the process, but I think to decrease the scrutiny is not what I want to go for while I'm a member of the legislature. There were some things stated in the testimony that I would like Gita to further clarify. And I know there's some reps from Gita, but they're not submitting the testimony. So I'm going to ask the committee chair to maybe follow up on a couple of these things. And also the Ancestral Lands Commission testified that there were leases that were being held up by the current law. And I guess if you could provide actual examples of that and how they were being held up. Because I want to clarify for the public that the law allows for leases in the long term. It does not prohibit long-term leases, absolutely not. All it does is says, if you're going to go over 5 years, then you must get additional scrutiny. And we've seen, as Senator Ada testified, leases for 30 years. We've seen other leases proposed since this law was enacted. And so Gita also makes a contention that the required additional layer of legislative approval creates additional obstacles and delays for promoting economic activity in terms of planning, financing, marketing, investment, and development. It really should, I don't know, I think if whatever the time limit appears in the statute, that they should be able to plan around that they're either going to get approval or not within 180 days or whatever the time period is. And then this contention that a 5-year limit on almost any real property development will almost consistently be deemed unfeasible. There's nothing that's attached to this that really backs that up. And so if that's really been the case, I mean, I guess I'd like to see where that statement comes from. It says, since the enactment of Public Law 32-40, GIDA has had firsthand experiences with foreign investors losing interest in Guam, along with missed opportunities for its community. And again, I'm not convinced that they have lost our investment, or they've rejected investing in Guam because they had to submit to a legislature approval. They know, I think, if they're going to try to use government land, that they are going to be subject to a lot of scrutiny, and I can't see that to be unreasonable yet. And again, I guess I have the perspective that all of these are, they're valid concerns, that there may be a delay, there's an additional level of scrutiny. I don't find it to be an obstacle. I think it's a level of scrutiny that the public deserves. And I think it absolutely deserves it based on the record that we have seen in government transactions. And so this is our way of protecting the people of Guam further. And I'm not saying any one of you participated in this. These are things that happened years ago, but we still very much remember them. And we're living through them. We're recognizing why we're not getting maximum value for these leases. And so thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Chalahi. Senator Talina Nelson. Senator Regine Biscoli, would you like to have any questions? Okay, so this concludes this part of the agenda. I just want to say that we are going to deliberate many of the things the testimonies that have come before us today and all the facts to come to our decision. So thank you for coming out and testifying. Tsuduas Masi. Okay, we've reached our midway mark. We're here to listen next to Bill number 2535, sponsored by Senator Tello Taitigui, relative to applying the ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel standard to all diesel fuel used in Guam. So I would like to offer the floor to my colleague, the sponsor of this bill, to introduce her bill.
Hafaday, and thank you, Madam Chair, for including Bill 25 in today's public hearing and for this opportunity to provide an overall on the measure which impacts our health and the environment. Madam Chair, after Public Law 30-184, establishing the ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel standard passed into law, the ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel standard task force under the Guam Environmental Protection Agency issued a report in December of 2010, which included recommendations to address road and off-road diesel-powered vehicles, boilers, and diesel-powered generators, either mobile or stationary,
and exempt the marine market from the ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel standard not to exceed 5,000 ppm. And just for the listening audience and my colleagues, when you're talking about 5,000 ppm, you're talking about the amount of sulfur in diesel. 15 ppm is the amount of sulfur content in ultra-low sulfur diesel. 5,000 ppm is the amount that's in diesel fuel, which is a higher amount of sulfur. So when I speak to that, I just wanted to make it clear before we move over so people understand. Madam Chair, after all the discussions I have had and the comments I've heard from representatives from the industry, regulatory agencies, and most especially on a local radio station, I believe Bill 25 serves as a good pulse check on where Guam stands with respect to the implementation of the now 8-year-old law that I authored in the 30th Guam legislature, which received the support of all 15 senators. This policy, Madam Chair, for the record, was supported by not only the Guam Power Authority, which at the time submitted testimony supporting the transition to, quote, the transition to ultra-low sulfur diesel. It was also pushed forward by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, which stated in 2010, quote, the intent of the ultra-low sulfur diesel standard law would go a long way toward improving air quality of the island, unquote. In light of recent comments calling both Bill 25-35 and Public Law 30-184, which was enacted in 2010, quote, impractical and unimplementable, and other comments claiming the inability of ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel on Guam. Madam Chair, you can go to any gas station on this island and all you will find is ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. Madam Chair, it begs several questions. Is Guam in compliance with the now 8-year-old law? Has Guam ignored the policy? Are stakeholders aware that ultra-low sulfur diesel is the standard for Guam? And are we all aware that suppliers such as IP&E publicly stated they would be the first ones, and they were the first ones, to supply and bring in ultra-low sulfur diesel back in 2010? Moving forward, Madam Chair, an even more important reason behind the introduction of Bill 25 is the issue of waste used oil. Although the bill discusses diesel fuel, it's prompted my office to do more research on this issue of waste used oil as well. Madam Chair, through a letter issued by Governor Joseph Atta in October of 1990, GPA, in conjunction with the Port of Guam and the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, is required to properly dispose of waste used oil through the burning of waste used oil. GPA has been using waste used oil mixture with other types of oil, which is currently burning at Cabras 1 and 2. Madam Chair, GPA publicly stated in 2016 that it would no longer accept waste used oil and that companies would be responsible for disposal. Once GPA stops using waste used oil, how is Guam going to dispose of this oil going forward? And Madam Chair, for the record, Guam produces close to 1 to 2 million gallons of waste oil on Guam a year. Madam Chair, GPA issued an RFP last year seeking to contract a firm to collect waste used oil from GPA's used oil facility and reprocess the oil for reutilization at the designated GPA power plant, provided the reprocessed oil meets GPA's full specification of ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. The RFP recognizes 5,000 ppm and not 15 ppm on that RFP. Why is this the case when the ultra-low sulfur diesel is at 15 ppm? Madam Chair, these are just a few comments and questions I wish to register on the record as the committee considers the next step forward on Bill 25, including any amendments that may be proposed by the community stakeholders and regulatory agencies. Finally, Madam Chair, I've met with a number of individuals and government agencies regarding the measure, including proposed amendments to align the effective date of the bill with the timeline supported by the state implementation plan, which according to Guam EPA is currently being updated. Another suggestion is to align the effective date with the decommissioning of Cabras 1 and 2. Madam Chair, it is clear that Guam will have to address the disposal of the waste used oil which our island currently generates, anywhere between, as I mentioned earlier, 1 to 2 million gallons a year. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the testimonies on this measure.
Thank you so much, Senator Taitigui. I would like to call up to testify all those that have signed up to come forward. So that's Leroy, I can't read out the last name really properly. From Unitech, Roland Gutierrez from Guam EPA, Simon Sanchez, Philip Gerling from Nissan Guam, and Hardy V from PAC Rev. We can begin from this side of the table. If you can state your name, please.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Leroy Moore. I'm president of Unitech Environmental Guam. My firm provides all forms of environmental services from hazardous waste disposal to used oil collection and recycling to environmental investigation remediation, where our company is one of the ones that Senator Taitigui has talked about for recycling of used oil. We collect typically between 500,000 to 1 million gallons a year of used oil that has been taken to the Cabras power plant and used as alternative fuel. Regarding specifically for the law, as the Senator has pointed out, the original law's intent is in line with federal EPA's intent to lower sulfur concentrations within diesel fuel. However, they did propose several exemptions, specifically for off-road equipment, construction equipment, farm equipment, generators, as you discussed. By changing the law to remove the retail or fuel imported to Guam for the purpose of sale and distribution to only used, that comprehensively changes the law and takes all of those alternative options out. That would also include biodiesel, being able to take vegetable oil and turn it into a diesel fuel that can be burned. So as it's currently written, we're not in support of that. Essentially, you are taking a usable product beyond ultra-low, which would be considered low sulfur diesel, and turning it into a waste product that I will need to help my clients to ship off island as a waste, essentially, if this law is enacted as is. So I would recommend that the legislature propose amendments to include those other exemptions. The used oil issue that you brought up, which is different from this specific law, is going to be a problem in the future. When Cabras 1 and 2 shuts down, there will be 1 million to 2 million gallons of used oil that will have to find a home somewhere. We have in the past, when GPA stopped accepting used oil, shipped that oil to the United States for disposal. It's a significant cost to the customers. Depending on shipping rates and current oil markets, that can be $10 a gallon. Now, that cost will be passed on to the end user. Someone brings their car in to have their oil changed, they're going to have a $50 oil fee. GPA, which is one of the largest generators of oil on Guam, will have to ship their oil off or find a home somewhere else for it. There are technologies to deal with used oil, to turn it from used oil into diesel fuel, other fuels, but if we make it into a diesel fuel, as written, you cannot get used oil to ultra-low sulfur standards. So essentially, there would be no need to try to use those technologies because we wouldn't be able to use the resultant product. Our firm deals with finding alternatives for using products that are waste for ones. That, you know, then if the military or a ship from offshore comes to Guam, has a problem with one of their tanks, for example, we had a vessel come into Guam where a CHT, basically a sewage line, broke within one of their fuel tanks, resulting in contaminating over 60,000 gallons of would be low sulfur diesel. So that diesel fuel was able to be processed, filtered, and reused on Guam. With the law written as, or amended as is, that waste or that material then would have to be shipped off island for disposal. So I would recommend, in accordance with EPA's original recommendations, that the exemptions that were brought up would be included within the bill so that we're not making a usable product into a waste. We fully support the ultra-low sulfur diesel standards and the phasing in of those. However, at the present time, there is still a large volume of fuel that is going to be coming through Guam that does not meet the ultra-low sulfur diesel standard. And by placing a restriction on that, it will, in the future, impact used oil issues that will be coming up. Thank you for my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I have the next person who signed up is Mr. Gutierrez from Guam EPA.
Hafade and good morning, Acting Speaker Talina Nelson, Chairwoman Sabina Perez, and honorable members of the 35th Guam Legislature. My name is Roland Torres, and I am the Air Pollution Control Program Manager for the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. Our administrator, Walter Ashley Anguero, sends his regrets for not being able to appear before you this morning as he is tending to a family matter. I'm here to offer his testimony on his behalf. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency stands in support of any practical legislation which seeks to lessen or to prevent any adverse environmental impacts on island, particularly in a manner that allows for Gov Guam to be proactive in practicing environmental stewardship. The agency believes that the intent of Bill 25-35 meets that mark, but may require additional language and amendments to avoid the pitfalls associated with our island's challenges to provide feasible and sustainable used oil disposal options. The agency has some immediate concerns with placing a prohibition on the Guam Power Authority to burn non-hazardous used oil. Our island's long-standing lack of disposal options for used oil resulted in Gov Guam's request for an exemption from US EPA for GPA to burn used oil. This exemption is granted under 40 CFR Part 69 via the Intermittent Switching Protocol, allowing for fuel source switching to occur when our winds blow offshore from our island. As you are all aware, the electric generation units located at the Cabras PD area burn this used oil at this present time. GPA is also under an executive order to burn used oil, and until GPA's capital improvement project for cleaner power generation is complete, a prohibition may impose a rise in illegally dumped used oils in our island's drains, stormwater and sewer systems, and jungles. A prohibition could also potentially bear an unintended cost burden upon the ratepayers, as we see in excess of 1 to 2 million gallons of oil produced by our island on an annual basis. Millions of gallons of used oil that must now be shipped off island for proper disposal. In the not too distant future, Guam will reduce its emitted pollutants and comply with the Clean Air Act once GPA's CIP is implemented. GPA will be aligned with the proposed updated state implementation plan that Guam intends to submit to US EPA as a requirement of our air pollution control standards and regulations. It is the agency's understanding, however, that once the new combined cycle power plants are constructed and operational, Cabras 1 and 2 will be decommissioned, resulting in our island's new and remaining electric generation units to operate on either ultra-low sulfur diesel or liquid natural gas. The agency acknowledges some challenges ahead with Guam's involvement. The community stakeholders, local and federal authorities must collaboratively address the future issue of used oil disposal and find a feasible solution, and hopefully do sooner than later. I want to assure you all that this legislative body has my complete support to assist or facilitate productive and meaningful efforts to find a solution to our island's used oil disposal dilemma. For the time being, however, we now acknowledge that allowing GPA to burn our island's used oil as a fuel source, despite not meeting the ULSD's fuel standard of 15 parts per million or less, is a temporary solution. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today, and I am available for any questions or comments that you may have regarding my testimony. Walter Leon Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. We'll hold the questions till after everyone testifies. Next on the list is Simon Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Buenos dias. Madam Chairman, Senator Moylan and Senator Rigel, welcome to the honor and fun of serving the public in the Guam legislature. Senator Taitagui, Senator Terlahi, Senator Vice Speaker Nelson, and Senator Bisco Lee. If I got the math right, I believe you're returning to your second term of the fun and madness, the fun of serving our public here in the Guam legislature. Thank you for allowing me to testify on Bill 2535. I'm here testifying as a private citizen and not as an elected member of the Consolidated Commission on Utilities. The views expressed are my own. Like all of you, I'm a taxpayer and a consumer of fuels and other petroleum products as an individual and as a business owner. Bill 25 proposes to amend Public Law 30-184, which required Guam to only use ultra-low sulfur diesel effective January 2011. The proposed amendment simply replaces the words, quote, fuel, and then the words that are being eliminated, fuel imported to Guam, and that's a key phrase, imported to Guam for the purpose of sale and distribution, and instead replace those words with the single word, used. This proposed change, this single word, would effectively end the burning of any waste oil immediately upon enactment. I oppose Bill 25 because the proposed amendment will create what I hope is an unintended consequence by immediately ending the ability of waste or used oil to be burned on Guam without providing a solution as to how Guam deals with its waste oil if it cannot burn this petroleum derivative. As other folks are already testifying, the cost to ship off waste oil is 8 to 10 times more expensive than the cost to burn the waste oil. If you can only ship off waste oil, these higher costs will be passed on to all Guam consumers who use oil. And you've already heard your oil change would be $50 just to dispose of the oil. Furthermore, if providers of oil-based services can't afford to ship it off because their customers can't afford it, then some providers, especially the small or home-based mechanics, will unfortunately dump this waste oil on the ground, threatening our aquifer, ocean, and surface water resources, or in our sewers, neither of which is a good idea. GPA currently burns waste oil in its Cabras units, which will all be retired in 2021 when the new generator comes online. And I should add, MEC 8 and 9, after the new generator comes online, will also only burn ultra-low sulfur diesel or natural gas. So GPA will no longer be able to burn this used or waste oil. GPA will only be burning ultra-low sulfur diesel or natural gas. As a result, GPA and the private sector is actively engaged in finding technologies that would provide for the conversion of waste oil to energy while mitigating its emission content. Senator Taitagui is correct. We did put out an RFP because GPA has to worry about what to do with its waste oil, since we also generate and use quite a bit of petroleum products. The intention of GPA is to find a solution before 2021, a solution that can't be done immediately, but perhaps we can do before 2021 when the new gens come online. There are technologies that exist and need to be allowed to be evaluated, but none of these technologies can convert waste oil or used oil to meet ultra-low diesel standards. These technologies will result in lower emissions content than the current practice, but not as good as ultra-low sulfur diesel. None of these technologies can be implemented upon an enactment of the proposed amendment. The industry needs time to work through this problem in collaboration and coordination with Guam EPA and the US EPA. The industry was already converting to ultra-low sulfur diesel in 2009-2010 due to federal law, long before this original law was passed in 2010. Frankly, the prior local law wasn't really needed. Now the industry is already working to address the waste oil dilemma before GPA stops burning it. And there may be technologies that would allow GPA to burn waste oil in the backup generators at lower emissions, but not as low as ultra-low sulfur diesel. The proposed amendment to current law will stop all this work on developing cost-effective and environmentally more sensitive solutions to handling our waste oil. It will cause huge consequences for all citizens who use oil without any recognition of those impacts and whether those impacts should burden our citizens while we pursue the noble goal of protecting our environment better. I'm also unsure of how the proposed amendment will impact other fuels, quote, used on Guam. Below is a table of fuels used on Guam and their sulfur content. As you can see, other fuels, quote, used on Guam have much higher ppms than ultra-low sulfur diesel. You can see jet fuel is 3,000 parts per million of sulfur, much higher than ultra-low sulfur diesel. Marine diesel for all of our shipping is much higher than ultra-low sulfur diesel. And yet, as was pointed out earlier, exemptions were granted because it recognizes that these industries cannot just go to ultra-low sulfur diesel and change the fuel content that is serving the entire industry and bring it down as low as ultra-low sulfur diesel. That is very difficult, very expensive to do. So as you look at, as you can see, other fuels, I think so. So with this proposed amendment and the use of marine fuel and jet fuel, because their emissions exceed ultra-low sulfur diesel, you're never going to get these fuels that low. That's not how they're made. Is this another unintended consequence? The following compares the sulfur content of various fuels used on island currently, for which there are already exemptions granted for pretty obvious reasons. If the goal is to change the way we fuel our community needs, then all stakeholders should be involved in determining how to do that and what is its impact. And only then do you write the legislation, and only if it's needed. Bill 3525 creates significant challenges for this community without providing for any alternative solutions or any impact analysis to the legislature and the citizens of Guam for their consideration. It should not be passed. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Next on the list, we have Philip Gerling.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chairman. Good morning, Senators. I'm Philip Gerling, General Manager at Nissan. We oppose the bill in its current form because of the limitations imposed on the consumers since we generate used oil from the customers we service. And as Leroy explained earlier and Simon talked about as well, the issue of disposing of used oil, if we have to ship it off island, makes the service mostly unaffordable for customers, which will result in more pollution on the island because people will just dump their oil. They will do their own oil changes and dump the oil. And it's somewhat similar to what happened with solid waste when the fees were increased and the bins were forced on customers. A lot of people have not gotten the service because they can't afford it. And so where does the waste end up? It ends up in the jungle and elsewhere. So we know that those circumstances are a reality on this island. We live in a community with a lot of low-income people. And so that's what we're going to face. So our position is to oppose the bill in its current form. And I agree with Simon that the the goal should be to work together and find a workable solution that benefits everyone, including low-income population on this island. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gerling. Mr. V?
Day Chairperson on Environment, Sabina Perez, and all honorable senators of 35th Guam Legislature. Sorry, getting over a chest cold. My name is Hardy V, and I work through my company, PacRev. I'm here to testify in support of this bill. This amendment to the 2010 Public Law 30-184 is to ensure that nothing less than ULSD makes it into the island in regards to diesel, not all fuel oils. Yeah. Which, by the way, I forgot to write this down, but I have to clarify that. I've been kind of studying into this industry for the last 3 years, so the information I'm being familiarized with is being given to me by experts I've been working with. So this is sort of the shared opinions of them as well. So anyway, yeah, so not all fuel oils. And if these non-compliant diesel fuels do somehow make it into the island, this bill makes it so that nobody is allowed to violate any EPA laws in regards to diesel, not fuel oils in general. So the difference between the two can briefly be put as diesel oils by definition is a fuel oil with a hydrocarbon makeup of C12H24 molecules with a flash point of about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That basically means 24 hydrogen atoms bonded to 12 carbon atoms. So any fuel with this molecular structure is a diesel oil. Petroleum or gasoline in the US is a mixture of different hydrocarbons with a carbon number of 4 or less. Hydrocarbons basically determines what the petroleum-based oil will turn out to be. Depending on how many hydrocarbons are in the fuel oil will make the product either a light oil such as gasoline or a heavy, dense, viscous material like asphalt. So somewhere in between there's diesel. So here we are talking about diesel, strictly diesel, not fuel oils, I have to emphasize again. This bill does not create a new regulation, but merely enforces the ones already in place by ensuring that nobody can dance around this law for diesel standards, not fuel standards. US EPA enforces that ULSD should be 15 ppm, parts per million, and seeing as these are the only diesels we were supposed to be bringing into the island anyway since the passing of 30-184, I don't see why it's a problem to restrict the consumption of non-ULSD as the reason why EPA enforces in the first place because the gas emissions that non-ULSD emits, and yeah, so it's not unrealistic to anticipate that we should be careful about risking being penalized by EPA when we can already proactively do something about this preemptively. So, which, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, one thing was it causes heavy gas emissions and also damages to the engines that, pretty much standardly uses ULSD. So, which by the way, also from what I've seen out there in my explorations for different technologies is that emissions aspect is relatively easy to handle as they say, with the proper technology. So basically ULSD just identifies, how clean the diesel is, not exactly the type of the fuel. So there's diesel and there's ULSD. So with that, I do hear the criticisms saying that this bill does not address used oils, and they are right, they are correct. This bill does not address used oil directly. So let me explain. It is 2019. There are technologies in the market that utilize processes that are able to convert these used oils to a reclaimed diesel product. It is the same with technologies that convert tire waste into a number 2 diesel oil, and can also be the same for municipal solid waste to a number 2 diesel oil as well. Number 2 diesel is just a general term for unspecified diesel. So it doesn't mean it's ULSD. You would have to refine the fuel to meet ULSD specs, even if you were able to do all that. So do we have a refinery on island? I mean, I think you can imagine how expensive that would be as well, yeah? So, and also it's just not economical to have a refinery on island just for that small amount of fuel. Yeah, this is precisely why these technologies have existed for some time around the world, but never really took off because of the economics. So since we don't have a refinery, I am convinced that one day somebody is going to come along and try to bamboozle the island into thinking that their technology is capable of turning our used oils into a diesel without disclosing that it isn't a ULSD product. Because there is this possible loophole, quote unquote, there is a very strong likelihood that somebody could take advantage of it at the island's expense. When that happens, the island will be in violation of fuel specs and gas emission regulations set forth by federal EPA laws. So subsequently, US EPA fines us, and let's say EPA fines us. And guess who has to pay for those fines in the end? Yeah. I acknowledge this bill doesn't have anything to do with waste or used oil. So I'm not quite sure about the strong opposition. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm convinced there's credibility, but I'm just not sure if I'm convinced of it yet. Sorry, I'm losing my place here. No, that inquires how much strong. Oh yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like, why go up in arms about the refining of a sensible law that is being enforced all over the world, as well as at the U.S. federal level, namely the U.S. EPA standards regulations for ULSD sulfur content at 15 ppm. This bill does not restrict GPA or anyone from burning used oils, because used oils are at the very least a fuel oil, not a diesel oil. This bill strictly enforces everybody here to only burn ULSD in regards to diesel. If you want to turn the used oils into a usable recovered fuel oil, quote unquote, that's fine, but I would strongly recommend capping the sulfur content to not exceed 0.1%, which translates to 1,000 ppm. Because as Mr. Sanchez mentioned, it's almost dang near impossible to get down to ULSD. So if you are going to convert these used oils to a diesel product, then there will be a problem with this bill. But so addressing the arguments, I understand the speculation that all trucks and heavy equipment on island will have to convert their engines to ULSD, but I strongly disagree. The experts that I've actually asked this to when I was kind of getting into this basically chuckled in my face when I asked it. So what I have learned is that you can take ULSD and reliably burn it in heavy fuel engines already without much retrofitting. But you cannot take non-ULSD spec diesel and burn it in ULSD engines. And that's the problem we face. All these trucks and equipment that an island required in 2010 or earlier should have no issues running on ULSD without any modifications needed. The oils just need blending, not an engine conversion. So I also understand the speculation that this bill fails to consider the fuel source for airplanes. But I also disagree, because airplanes do not use diesel fuels. Large commercial and military aircrafts use unleaded kerosene, which is Jet A1, or naphtha kerosene, Jet B fuels, which also is determined by how many hydrocarbons are in there yet. While smaller engine aircrafts use propeller planes and Cessnas use avgas, or aviation gasoline. So basically, ULSD law does not affect airplanes neither. And this was given to me by my friends in the aviation industry. I have also heard that there's not much places to buy, if not much, nowhere to buy ULSD, but I did notice quite a few times already when I'm at Mobile, and as mentioned by Senator Taitagui, that Mobile does have I took a picture of it actually yesterday because I wanted to, I don't know if I can spread these around. Wait, may I spread it around? Like, it's already on the pump. It says, excuse me, ULSD ultra diesel fuel, 15 ppm. So, I mean, Mobile's bringing it in. And then a while back, I did ask Shell, I did ask Shell N76 Circle K. And on Shell's website, they even say they bring in ULSD. I can spread those around later. And this one I have to still confirm, but the attendant I asked at 76 Circle K called her manager and asked if they have ULSD, and the manager actually confirmed that it is. So basically all gas stations are supplying ULSD. And if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think they all get it from Mobile anyway. They just have their own blends. So if Mobile's only bringing in ULSD, I don't think the others have a choice. So quite frankly, it just seems unfair to those who put in millions of dollars to comply with the law, so that the economy on Guam, like the truck drivers, they don't have to worry about where their fuel comes for their new ULSD fleets, while allowing for an opening to let someone move in with some low-grade diesel reclaimer and disregard the already existing law that only regulates how it can get here, with no mention of what can be done with it. This is why I think this bill is sound. It's consistent. So basically, there is no real reason why this bill should be shot down. The scenario I mentioned earlier is more real than, we think. If there is one bulletproof reason why we should let a potential violator seize this opportunity while disregarding the laws, then possibly costing the ratepayers more money and penalties, I'd like to hear it. So actually, if you want to talk about waste oil, in my opinion, this isn't the bill to talk about it. I think there should be another bill to address waste oil. So I cannot comment on waste oil at this time unless this what the legislature feels is appropriate. Then okay, but if it's waste oil, I will step aside for now. Then let that discussion happen. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. V, for your testimony. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues, Senator Clint Rigel, as well as Senator Kelly Marsh-Titano. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to open up the floor to my colleagues for questions. Senator Vice Speaker Talina Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm a little bit confused now because I'm hearing conflicting testimonies, and so I'm trying to wrap my head around perhaps the impact that we don't see, right? I'm getting a testimony from Mr. Hardy Vai, and it seems very clear that this bill does not impact used oil. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And then on the other hand, I'm getting testimony from the gentleman to the right of Mr. Vai saying that this bill will impact our used oil and how we are able to dispose of it. And so perhaps maybe for the public, we should first be able to understand how do we process used oil and what is the cost for like a lower income household? Well, what is the cost of the people when we want to dispose of used oil? And how do we sell the used oil, or how does Cabris, how does GPA receive that used oil, and how much is made from the seller? Would one of your gentlemen like to explain the process, perhaps? I didn't quite catch your name, either you or Mr. Sanchez. It seems like there's some, okay, can we just be very specific? I know, Mr. Sanchez, you like to go beyond the scope and tangible, but please, let's just understand the process and
the current process.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Chairman Duenas is here and John Beneventi is here, but as I understand it, GPA has, since Senator Atta's time, or Governor Atta's time, has been burning used oil, waste oil in the Cabris generators because that technology can accept that kind of dirtier fuel.
What type of used oil?
Is
this like from our trucks, our cars? Is it cooking oil?
Yes.
Everything.
And I think there's two distinctions. There's used oil and there's waste oil. And waste oil is actually a hazardous waste and has to be thought about differently and handled differently. And then there's used oil. Okay. But both byproducts exist on Guam because we have engines and motors on Guam, right? And so they then are no longer automatically reusable once they've been used through an engine, that we can't just grab it and throw it in your car, right? They have to be processed in environmentally acceptable ways. So what Guam has been doing for decades, because we have the 4 Cabris, now 2 Cabris units, is burning it because it was so much cheaper for GPA to accept that fuel than to force all the gas stations, all the mechanics, that repair vehicles, all the wholesalers that have their fleets, all the boilers on Guam. It was easier and lower cost to all of us to have GPA burn it. Now, I don't know, does GPA charge to accept it, or we just take it? So there's no charge from GPA, because from our point of view, it's free fuel.
Does GPA pay for the fuel? Or?
No.
Okay.
No. So GPA took it because it was free fuel for GPA. That helps the ratepayer, right? And it also did something with this byproduct of our use of engines, all right? And that's how it's been. The concern we have is the way the plain reading of the bill as originally drafted and now amended. Senator Taitigui alluded to it in her press release. She called it a loophole that allowed GPA to burn this. But that loophole actually had positive benefits for the community. And I think her reference, and she can speak to this, the loophole I think she's referring to is because waste oil was not imported to Guam. It was already here. And therefore, now she wants to say, well, okay, I want to close that loophole, and I want to say, if it's used on Guam, it has to meet ultra-low sulfur diesel standards. Well, you're not going to be able to get used oil and waste oil to meet ultra-low sulfur diesel. I think all 5 of us agree on that, right? You can't get it down to 15 parts per million. Look at all the other fuels that are on Guam. They're way up there.
Mr. Vai, do you agree on that? Do you agree with Mr.
Agree that it cannot be brought down to 15?
Yes.
It's practically impossible, but I'm sure somebody out there can do it, but you're talking about a very large, expensive system.
Okay.
So practically impossible works for me, right? And if you could, it would be very expensive, right? And then you'd have to pass on that cost, right? So we have a dilemma. All of us have a dilemma, and I know Senator Taitigui is sincere in her desire to address this dilemma, but I think the solution she's proposing would create an unintended consequence, because if you pass this bill in the next session and it's signed into law, it's upon enactment. And so GPA would stop burning the fuel, as we did a few years ago. When we prepared to move to the new generator, we told the industry, hey, we're stop burning it. And the industry said, well, hey, we don't have a way to deal with it. So now we're taking it. We're still burning it in Cabras 1 and 2. We can refine it and have it processed and deal with it in our backup generators. But it technically would violate the law that was passed in 2010. It technically violates the law. So you got one law saying one thing, you've got another law, but you've got another issue that it creates, because unfortunately there's a byproduct of used and waste oil, which is currently being addressed by Guam Power Authority burning it. So the industry and Guam Power Authority are looking for ways to deal with this problem before 2021 or 2022, when the new gens are online. But the way this is written, it would make it we'd have to do it now. And it's just not ready for prime time yet. And that's the concern, I think, that everyone at this table that opposes the bill, not the intention, but the actual words that create, I think, unintended consequences, because it will prevent GPA from burning the fuel upon enactment. What will all the dealers and the mechanics do with this byproduct of people repairing their cars if they have to now absorb a cost that is free at GPA, but now you got to pay? And I think, as Leroy said, your oil change alone will go up $50 just to dispose of the oil, right? That is drained from your car. So and that's going to affect everybody, the average citizen just going in for an oil change. So we got to think about that.
So Mr. Vai says, Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Vai in his testimony says, this bill does not restrict GPA or anyone from burning used oils, because used oils are at the very least a fuel oil, not a diesel oil.
Well, I would disagree with that.
Why? I think...
Well, from a regulatory standpoint, I agree with Mr. Vai, but as Simon Sanchez said, she alluded to putting in language, which is not currently in the bill, that would restrict any boiler or any other electrical generation unit or anybody that uses a fuel, and it's a matter of interpretation. I understand what a fuel oil is versus what a diesel is. Everything is a spec. Gas is a spec, jet fuel is a spec. So when you say diesel fuel, then you're going to say, no, it's not diesel fuel, it's used oil, and we're using it as a fuel oil. But it's a matter of interpretation. And if it interpreted that any fuel used in an electrical generation unit can only use ULSD, and if she puts that in the bill, and through her press release that she put out, it was alluding to that, and so that's the only reason we're opposing it. I mean, technically, if we were going to give it a technical review, she passed the bill, and it was interpreted by a lawyer that says, okay, we understand that this is not a fuel oil. If the AG says, yeah, a fuel oil is not diesel fuel, then it would be one thing. But it's the same with the real estate law. I mean, you can't go over 1 million. It's an interpretation.
So you're saying that we should define what the fuel oil and diesel.
See, that's what she was trying to do. She was when she let her press release out, and we saw what she was alluding to about the task force recommendation, then we were like, okay, if she does put those words in,
it's not in this bill.
It's not in this current bill.
Okay.
Right. So we have no effect. But to preempt that and prevent any amendment coming in without us having a say in it, then that's what you wanted to do. As a regulatory standpoint, we don't have a position on what is burned as long as it meets the regulations, because in the States they have used oil incinerators for waste energy, and on Guam we currently don't have we currently have a ban on waste energy. So we can't say as a regulatory agency, if you propose waste energy, as long as it met the requirements and the emission standards, then we would say we'll be fine. We're not opposed to that. All we are is to make sure that the regulations are followed. I mean, GPA, the only reason now that they have a switching protocol is because they don't have the actual emission controls in their combustion units to control the release of sulfur. So that's why it's a non-attainment area. And so the switching protocol allows them to burn this high sulfur fuel when the winds go offshore. So it doesn't per se affect our island. It goes out into the ocean or into the air, and we're so far away from everybody else. US EPA agreed, okay, you can do this. But the exemption is going to end because if the winds blow to Guam, there will be no way that US EPA would allow this without the actual controls. And anytime you put controls in, it costs a lot of money. So we can have a waste energy incinerator here on island as long as it had the proper controls and meet the regulatory standards. But, you know, that is up to the public will. So what we're saying is, if without another way to get rid of this oil, Guam EPA is only opposed to it because we're afraid that, as they've spoken to earlier, there will be a dumping of oil. And if you know, one gallon of oil can contaminate 1 million gallons of water. Yeah.
So, Mr. Gutierrez, I know that you're saying that now, but earlier I heard you also say that to look at the federal statute and to include the exceptions in the bill. And so is this still your position to ensure that the exemptions are in the bill?
Yes, if we can work with the senator, and we've actually met, and we've talked to her about what is a fuel oil, what is diesel fuel, and how to word it right so that the units that actually use diesel only use ELSD. But there are other combustion units that are not diesel units. They're basically combustion units that burn any type of fuel oil. And with the proper controls, they can be used on island, but that would be all up to the legislation of the body of the legislature, because I've spoken to our legal counsel and she said without any type of legislation in regards to waste energy, there's no way we can even move forward into having some type of unit that will combust used oil on island and that will meet the regulatory standards.
So I also want to address, I'm almost done, Madam Chair. I also want to ask a question of the disposal fee. It was mentioned that if we implement something of this nature, that it could impact the disposal fee for if we wanted to change our oil, and you know, we would see something perhaps in the $50 value just to dispose oil. How do we know that's a certainty? I mean, what guarantees that we're going to have to pay $50 to dispose of oil? Just to dispose the oil, not to purchase, not to change it, just to dispose it.
Senator, I can tell you that when GPA was shut down for the 3-month period where they did not accept oil, we shipped out 60,000 gallons of used oil. The charge to the customer was $10 a gallon. In effect, the only customer who paid that was the United States Navy. They were the only ones who would afford it. Every other customer who I offered the used oil service for, but told them I could not ship it off or could not burn it on island at GPA, essentially stored the oil until GPA accepted it again. And that in itself causes problems. You have many facilities storing much more oil than they should, which also provides potential releases in the future. The option of shipping it off island, honestly, from a business standpoint, I'm fine with that. If I can take it to GPA, it's cheaper for my customers. If I have to ship it off island, I will. Either way, I'll charge for the service, whichever one we're doing. But I do know that we do have a large community here of people who are not high-income individuals. Yes, I'll pay $50 to have my oil changed just to dispose of the oil, but 95% of the rest of the island is not going to do that. We already find oil in the jungles and drums, and every guy who's got a backhoe who works for his friends, if he's not hiring us to dispose of his oil, who is? The exemptions that were in the original legislation that US EPA has for off-road, or stationary storage generators, boilers, those issues are put in the bill we would support. But once you do a blanket, it's only ultra-low sulfur diesel, it cuts out all of those things. I mean, a ship comes in here with 40,000 gallons of low sulfur diesel, I'm going to tell them it's $10 a gallon for me to ship it back to the States.
Okay. Thank you. One last question, Madam Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. So what's going to happen when we get the combined cycle power plant up? Are anyone in our agencies looking at addressing the solution? All right. So please come forward and explain to us the impacts, and I hope the answer is not an incinerator.
Madam Chairman, I'm sorry I didn't sign in earlier because this is basically a used oil problem, but please, for the record, my name is Joseph T. Dueñas. I'm the chairman for this Consolidated Commission on Utilities. Senator, we actually brought this topic up back a couple of years. We do a lot of planning. You know that. We've been planning on this generator since 2008. So we knew we were going to have problems at some point. So we've begun to tell the industry and say to everybody who deals with used oil, we're going to have a problem. We're going to end this. This is a timing problem. And that's why we brought it up, I think, about 2 years ago. I spoke to Rotary clubs. I've spoken to other groups. And all we're saying is, my point is, we are looking at potential solutions. We don't have the solution yet, but we believe between the time it takes us today, well, actually 2 years ago, to when we actually get the generators up and running at Okudu and convert over 8 and 9, then at that point, we hope to have a solution. So we are actively looking, because GPA itself also generates used oil. So we're looking at how do we address this problem. Incineration is one potential. No, I'm just trying to tell you that's a solution. There are other solutions. So we're looking. And my thought to you good people today is, allow us the time to look for those solutions. And you know us, we are working on these things. It's not like we're not going to wait until the last moment. We're actually working on it now. We hope to get ahead of the curve and have a solution for this before we have to take Cabras 1 and 2 out. And for the record, I need to be clear. When we turn on the new generation at Ukudu and convert over 8 and 9, in the conversion process, 1 and 2 will still be running. So they won't stop running in 2021. Because you can't just shut down 8 and 9 and not have power. So these are all the plans we have. And we're just simply saying, we are working on this. Just allow us the time and allow us the time to do our job. Okay?
And Vice Speaker, if I may, Mr. Gutierrez alluded to another problem. There is technologies that can take used oil and convert it into energy and meet standards. But we currently have a law that could be interpreted to mean you can't even do that. And so waste to energy also has some complexity in terms of what that may mean, and so we may have to address that law as well. So that's why I think we're all saying, let's do it collaboratively. Let's take the time together to kind of figure out the desired solution as best we can. And sometimes environmental solutions are a function of mitigation, not of, you may not be able to completely avoid it, but you can mitigate the impact. But let us work together on that before we start changing laws that have some unintended consequences.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Mr. John Benavente, you wanted to add to the conversation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, Vice Speaker, Senators. I really didn't sign up to testify earlier because I am kind of confused as to what we're trying to do. And so this is why I think we first need to do really to establish what is the objective here, really. Are we trying to not stop the burning of used oil? Are we trying to say ultra-low sulfur diesel is the only fuel to be used on this island or so? So if you look at the way the bill set up, diesel oil, so we really doesn't apply to what we're doing at Cabras today. But then I could understand the various concerns here, because when you say everything has to be burned ultra-low sulfur diesel, it takes away the exemptions that are provided for marine diesel, for boilers or other equipment that are already permitted on the island to burn them. And I've been for years, and it's really under no federal or US EPA regulation that says they cannot burn it today. I'd like to go back to 2010 when we began to burn ultra-low sulfur diesel. To me, it wasn't really, my understanding is it really wasn't a federal law that was coming in to tell us you cannot burn any other diesel in Guam but ultra-low sulfur diesel. It was because all new engines being built can only burn ultra-low sulfur diesel. And so therefore, if we were going to buy equipment post-2010 and not have ultra-low sulfur diesel, we couldn't use it on this island. So even GPA itself are buying new bucket trucks, new equipment, and all of that, with requiring ultra-low sulfur diesel specifications. And so therefore, we as a GPA agreed that, okay, because the fuel that was being brought in, it's been brought in mostly by Mobil and Exxon, if you will, at the time. And they used one tank to bring all of this oil into. So I said, okay, we're one of the users. Well, they supply us diesel. So I said, okay, we have an issue also. The island has an issue. That's why we agreed to go ahead and start burning ultra-low sulfur diesel. So that was an exception that got us into ultra-low sulfur diesel. Yes, it's cleaner and everything, but as could be seen by the table, we're burning, remember, ultra-low sulfur diesel is 15 parts per million sulfur. Today, we're burning fuel at Cabras, 20,000 parts per million. No? And again, the way is really not necessarily the fuel that controls what happens in the air. It's the emissions that come out of it. Because you can have equipment, and then you have mitigating scrubbers or anything to make it clean, and then you can emit it. So it really, that's where Guam EPA, US EPA, permits all sources that emit emissions into the air. So, for example, right now we're burning ultra-low sulfur diesel, but we can still get permitted for 5,000 parts per million diesel, as long as our emissions emits our air permit emissions. So it's really not the fuel, it's how the emission occurs. So again, you know, the facts are this: it will cost those that are using marine diesel today, the 5,000 parts per million. It would cost them more because ultra-low sulfur diesel is more expensive. But they are permitted for environmental reasons. They comply with environmental reasons for all their boilers and all the other, the prior 2010 equipment, the bulldozers, the trucks and all of that, they can still burn that old, the 5,000 parts per million ships that come in here using engines, they burn the 5,000 parts per million, still in compliance at this point. No? So again, putting it all also low sulfur diesel is really, I'm not sure why we're trying to do that. We're trying to increase the cost for everybody or what? Because as far as compliance, they're compliant with the emissions. We're compliant with the emissions and stuff. So now separate from there to used oil. In 1993, there was a major issue that came out, and my friend over here, and congratulations, you've been with Nissan for all these years, correct? Big problem on the island, disposable waste oil. So we worked out an agreement that we will try and burn this thing in the Cabras power plant. And really what it is used oil from the automotive changeouts. Some areas when they have engines running, there's an oil, spills out of the engine, it gets to a water separation. All that is considered any used oil that is not still in its pure form, So then all of that, we agreed we could take it and burn at the Cabras, which is a steam boiler, as long as we test it for hazardous material like PCB and all of that, which was a main concern at the time. So that process has began in 1993 as a, if I may quote, temporary solution. I come back in 2003 and the temporary solution is still there. In 2015, we had an explosion on Cabras 3 and 4, which made Cabras 1 and 2 much more critical to the system. So I tried to say, okay, burning this used oil has some impact on the reliability of the steam boilers. So at that time, I tried to say, okay, we're going to stop burning waste oil. And as mentioned earlier, some stored it, some was shipped off island, and all of that. But at the end, I had to start it up again because it would have become a major issue. But I did say then that I looked to the commercial industry to look for solutions. Because when we retire Cabras 1 and 2 in 2021, 2022, around that time frame, then we don't have a way to burn this because we won't have any more steam boilers, no? And so therefore, that's that we've asked them that since we stopped this thing in 2016. There was something mentioned earlier, and Senator Taidigui mentioned about there is a bid out for disposal of waste oil. And it does ask for ultra-low sulfur diesel specs. But also it opens it up to something like 5,000 parts per million specs. The reason for that is, we're getting work back from the industry that they cannot do it reasonably or at 15 parts per million. So therefore, if they can take this oldest waste on the island and could process it and come up with a fuel that is similar to a diesel fuel, and it's about 5,000 parts per million, which is marine diesel, and we can burn that and get it permitted, and the proponents have to get it permitted, that we can burn it in a combustion turbine or a diesel engine on the island. And again, it's US EPA and GEPA permitted in terms of environmental emission. Then we have a potential solution to the waste oil. See? So again, all of this, all we're trying to do is we do have some waste oil. We have a lot today ourselves from the MEC 8 and 9, from leaks or anything that happened, or the purifiers when they clean the fuel, there's some oil that comes out of that. But when we convert to the new power plant, we provide that problem for us is going to go away. So we're going to generate a lot less waste oil, but we're still going to have to do something with that in addition to the whole island problem that we have. So where we are today is, we have to find a solution for waste oil. or used oil. And we're working towards that. We're asking the industry to make that happen. And at the same time, I think part of the concern of the bill is that it won't impact those that are using non-ultra-low sulfur diesel today, which is really, the ultra-low sulfur diesel was an exception at the time and not the rule. But now we're trying to make that the rule instead of the exception, which is going to impact customers' costs throughout different areas. So that's my history on all of this and where we're heading today in terms of the thing. But and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. No?
Thank you, Mr. Beneventi. I would like to open the floor to my colleagues, starting with my far right, Senator Clint Rigel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so as I'm understanding it here, one of the main issues is the ability to burn this waste oil, right? So currently you guys are burning it in the Cabras power plants, but that's going to be closed down soon in what, 2 years?
2021, 2022, somewhere around there.
2 to 3 years?
Very soon.
And then the idea is to burn them in the combined cycle plant. That's
no, Senator.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You won't have a place to burn it. I'm sorry.
That's great.
You won't have a place to burn it, and you guys are working on a solution to burn it, right? But you guys don't have one yet, so we don't know what we're going to do with that fuel, as well as the fuel that you guys create, the waste oil that you guys create from the combined cycle plant will create waste oil, and other plants, right, will create waste oil.
In our fleet and other uses of petroleum
Do
products.
the plants create more waste oil than, say, like, you know, vehicles?
Today, I don't have the ratio, but yeah, we do generate substantial amount of oil from the MEC 8 and 9 units. But when the new combined cycle comes on, it's going to be it's very, very not that much from there.
But there'll still be some, so we have to still figure out how to deal with that smaller amount.
For that. So I have a solution. Solar energy produces no waste oil, and actually if you converted that, you wouldn't have to worry about getting rid of any of the waste oil, and I think solar energy is actually cheaper right now than fuel energy.
Yes,
So-
but it's not 24/7, which is then you have to invest in batteries, and when you add batteries plus solar energy, right now that's the challenge. And we will, you know, we are well on our way. We've already exceeded the current plan that Senator Pangilinan and GPA developed to be at 25% renewable by 2035. We'll be there by 2021, 2022 when we finish these 2 new solar projects that at 120 megawatts, and now we're working with the Navy for another 90 megawatts. But you can't go 100% solar and be cost effective to our ratepayers overnight. That's why even Hawaii and I forget the others, California, they're saying by 2045, by 2050, there's a process, there's a planning, and that's what I would encourage how we solve this current problem. We need to get together and plan it out, but it can't be upon enactment of a law today. We got to figure it out together and give us time and then see where public policy needs to intervene, because there's a lot of policy already on the books. We don't need to create law just to create law. We need to create the law when there's a gap, but we can work together on the gaps. You're getting a very good orientation on the challenge that there will still be used and waste oil after GPA moves to solar energy, the new generators. There's still going to be an issue for vehicles, cars, and boilers, you know, vehicles and boilers and marine. So, and you can already see that US EPA allows for fuels that have much higher ppm sulfur content, because they recognize that it's difficult to tell the entire airline and shipping industry that you got to go to ULSD or some fuel that gets down to 15 ppm. It's a nice idea, but the cost on citizens would be so significant that you at least have to recognize that and think about that if you want to impose it.
Sure. So
could I add, Senator, with your indulgence, please? I need to correct something. We are adding 120 megawatts of alternate renewable energy into solar farms And then we are adding another 40 megawatts with our military partners. With the 26 megawatts, that'll bring us up to about 186. And then with the rooftop solar that we have, which is around 11 or 13 megawatts, we'll be close to 200 megawatts. That's an
great.
important, just a minute. I need to make sure we're clear on this. That's a good number, but you have to understand there's a limit as to how you put solar in to an isolated grid like there is on Guam. You can't just add
I mean, the grid's isolated, whether it's oil or whatever you're using, it's an isolated grid.
No, you have to understand. I just wanted to try and give you some information. When you look at the mainland that has interconnected grids, that's the area where they continue to add huge amounts of renewable energy, but they also continue to build natural gas-fired generators.
Well, sure, there's a lot of natural gas companies that,
No, it's because
it's a huge debate in the States, too, over fracking, all the liquid natural gas, et cetera. Anyways, we're straying away from the topic, actually. I should probably shift gears here. I don't want to stray too far off the topic. We are talking about this particular bill. So, and I apologize, I brought it up first, so I know you were expounding upon that. So it's my fault for bringing it up. So if we can continue on, the other question I have is, is GPA at risk of being fined? Let's talk about possible fine if you guys continue burning the fuel for the next 2 years.
If we don't build this new generator, but they know we're building it.
How much time do you have?
We can answer? No, from a regulatory standpoint, I mean, if they have, the only reason they'd be fined is if they didn't go into their new protocol. What it is that they have to have certain controls, and there's limitations on the amount of emissions that you can put out. As Mr. Benedetti said, it doesn't matter really the fuel that goes in. It's what comes out of those stacks. And if they have the appropriate scrubbers and other things, the reasons why that they'll be fined is because they were given a time frame to stop this exemption protocol, intermittent switching, and so they were going to go to new technology. And so once the units are decommissioned, then that's when, if they did then try and burn anything above and not meet the standard, because we have emission rates for the stack per hour of how much you can actually put out. And if you burn a certain amount of fuel and you don't have the appropriate controls and you release more than that emission rate, then you will be fined.
They were supposed to have emissions controls. The option instead GPA and CCU went with is instead of putting in the emission controls, the scrubbers, et cetera, just decommission it and build a new plant.
Exactly.
My question is, how long do we have before we have
to do that?
That's correct,
Senator. In terms of and again, I would like to separate the two subjects. The used oil burning, that's ongoing until we can, there's no fines associated with that. It's more the EGU MAC and regulations that came on board in 2013, 2015 for the existing type of power plants that we have. So we've been working, and again, those, as we have mentioned before, potentially liable for hundreds of millions of dollars of penalties if we don't work out an agreement with the US EPA.
Right, what is the agreement?
And which we have been working with them towards a consent decree. And part of the consent decree, as we have mentioned, given to them before, is to build new combined cycle units and retire the Cabers 1 and 2 unit and convert MEC 8 and 9 from heavy oil to ultra-low sulfur diesel. So right now, we're still working towards the consent decree. They've been seeing the progress that we've been working. We have the land, we have the bid out. We hope to have a contract sometime this summer to make that happen. And so hopefully sometime this year, we will complete a consent decree that allows us now to eliminate those penalties as a result of what we're doing. No? So that's the
consent decree is not finalized yet, basically.
Not yet.
You're still working on it. And in the interim, they're allowing you to do this, but if you don't come to a consent decree, then you get fined, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What is the likelihood that you will get to a consent decree?
The likelihood is, I think we all want a consent decree. The consent decree allows us to build and eliminate those penalties because again, I don't think US EPA is trying to, economically destroy the island of Guam, no? They've given us exemption for burning high sulfur fuel versus low. No? But they also want to see that we have a solution to comply with that regulation. No? And so that's why we've been, since 2015, have communicated with them that this is the plan on how to comply. And since then, we've gone through a lot of process through the PUC, through the legislature, to show them that we are in fact heading to that, to comply with what we had given them. No? So that's where we are at that point. So you're asking me, I think I'm quite confident that we will have a consent decree. No?
Is there a deadline or a milestone you have to reach in order at a certain time frame for the consent decree?
Well,
before
we initially
a fine is triggered?
We initially said in our plans that we're going to try and do it by 2021. So that's kind of spread a little bit, but I think they won't be unreasonable in ensuring that we have progressed substantially to get to this point. No? So right now, I guess they can come out and file a court suit similar to what they have on the stipulated order or any other thing to get us to. But again, that doesn't, that doesn't solve the whole issue, right? They're not here to try and economically destroy this island. But what they're trying to do is make sure that we come out with a solution to comply with the regulations, and we're doing that. And actually, we're doing a lot more, and we're showing that to them in that we're putting in a lot of renewables, like was mentioned earlier, 160. That wasn't part of the plan, but that reduces our energy emission footprint by 25%. So again, as we move forward, we want to comply. We want a clean island. We're trying to get an economically sound generation capacity coupled with renewables to stabilize our costs. All of this is part of the plan that we have today and are implementing.
Could I just add on to that?
Yes.
I think, Senator, what you're asking for is, some sort of assurance that U.S. EPA is working with us. And I think the best way I can give that to you is U.S. EPA, if they chose to, could already fine us. They could have fined us back in 2013 and 2015 when we violated Rice MAC and then when we violated EGU MAC. So they could have already fined us. The fact that they're not fining us is an indication that they are working with us and that they and we have a plan. And so that's the best thing I can show you. They have the power right now to fine us, and they have chosen not to.
Okay. Actually, dispense it to, we're kind of getting off topic. Okay. We can have a separate informational hearing regarding this. Okay. So I'd like to continue regarding the bill. If there are any senators who would like to continue to ask questions, starting with Senator Talahi. Okay. Senator Moylan. Senator Kelly Marsh, Taitano. No? Okay. Senator Talo Taitagui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I greatly appreciate you gentlemen here providing testimony and your concerns. I do have a couple questions, and I know it can be quite confusing, as we move away from this bill and talk about other issues and the $1 million question of what are we going to do with our waste oil. But anyways, I just wanted to ask a few questions. With EPA, you have the state implementation plan. When do you plan on putting that out?
We're supposed to have a draft out in the end of March this month.
Okay.
And it will go to US EPA for review, and we're supposed to finalize it in October. And this is regards to the SO2 NACs for the Cabras PD area.
Okay. The other question is, other than California, where it's very similar to what I'm introducing today, where California can only burn ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel, what other states other than California has this law?
I couldn't answer that for you. I could do some research and get back to you.
I appreciate it if you did. Also, what is EPA doing with regulatory, as far as an agency, to oversee any oil that's being dumped in areas? I mean, what are you doing to try and prevent that? And do you go out regularly to see if any of this dumping is going about of oil?
Yes, we do. We have a solid waste program that's being that does investigations in regards to this. But the problem with this type of enforcement is what we call midnight dumpers. I mean, Guam EPA only works from 8 to 5, and most of the dumping that occurs happens after hours. And so it'd be tough to go down a back road in the middle of the night when a guy's dumping a container. But we try and do our best, and we always ask for the public. As you've seen, social media, they've been coming up. We've done a lot of further investigation. But I mean, other than us actually catching a person, it's really hard for us to enforce against them unless we can find some evidence that would link them to the actual dumping. And if somebody dumps oil, I mean, the only way to do it was to profile the oil. All we know is where it came from, not who dumped it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that EPA stays on top of this, considering, we're going to have to deal with this. Now, my colleagues earlier tried to figure out why are the waste oils connected to this bill. And this bill, simply put, just requires that any diesel being burned on this island is burned with ultra-low sulfur diesel. Very clear, straight to the point. Now, I do understand the concern of GPA and what they're currently doing, but we are in the midst of US EPA coming down and fining us $150 million if we don't comply to using the right fuel and burning, the process in burning our fuel. And I'm glad that GPA has taken the initiative to ensure that the new plants coming up only use ultra-low sulfur diesel. So my question is, why do you have an RFP going out that says 5,000 ppm when the ultra-low, you cannot use any other diesel other than ultra-low sulfur diesel in these new power plants? And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Benavente, this question.
Again, I mentioned earlier, well, first of all our power plants are compliant except the Cabers 1 and 2, no, and MEC 8 and 9. The other combustion turbines, diesels are compliant. We made we put in some control technologies that made them compliant, the small diesel units. So we are burning ultra-low sulfur diesel in all our plants today. So as far as complying with the way we generate power, that's not an issue. The reason why we're going out for this bid is for the waste oil, used oil. How do we get rid of the used oil? Okay? And so therefore, that's why we've asked for ultra-low sulfur, or at worst case, they provide up to 5,000, which is the marine diesel, but also they have to be able to dispose of that, to burn it or whatever. And as we mentioned earlier, you can still burn 5,000 parts per million diesel.
Into the new ultra-low sulfur diesel plants?
No. There's no plan to burn it on the new power plant. Okay.
So where are you going to burn this?
And in any case, you're talking about 1 million gallons. The new power plant is going to burn hundreds of millions of gallons of fuel a year. You're talking about 1 million. The problem is, what are we going to do with this 1 million of waste oil on the island? And what little that we generate also down the road? How do we take care of that problem? So I'm saying, if it's processed into a fuel that could be burned and could burn in a technology and is permitted by EPA, that it is compliant with air regulations, then we should be able to allow that. And so what I'm saying is that the machines that we have today, the combustion turbine, can burn 5,000 parts per million. And so if they're able to come up and agree that there is a technology to do that, so be it, but they still have to get the permit from US EPA to allow it, so then we all work together to find a solution. It may be that if this thing became law, it may be that we have to come to the legislature and say, we need an exemption to this law that you just passed to allow us to burn so that we can get rid of the waste oil. So that's the reason why we're looking for a solution. And so when the industry is coming in and saying, we can do this and this, but so therefore we have to allow them the process to see.
So, Mr. Benavente, what you're saying is that if U.S. EPA allows you to continue to burn anything other than ultra-low sulfur diesel, like the United States is moving toward ultra-low sulfur diesel. Even our maritime ships are going to 1,000 ppm to be used. And that's on the MARPO, if you want to read that, Mr. Sanchez, on MARPO. U.S. is going towards cleaner air, and what makes Guam exempt?
No,
I don't understand that part, but you know,
Senator,
Mr. Benavente, for
we're
the
not
sake
going,
of time.
I don't know whether I'm making myself clear.
No, I
we are
understand what
going
you're
to
saying.
ultra low sulfur diesel for, we're going to use 2 million barrels a year, multiply that times 42. That's so many million gallons a year that we're going to burn, all ultra low sulfur diesel. So if you don't want us to use anything at all, then the balance of what we generate, we're going to have to ship off island at a $10 a gallon rate.
Well, Mr. Benavente,
But
that's
as
what
far
I'm
as
trying to
complying,
say.
we are going to be compliant. We are. There's no doubt about that.
Mr. Benavente, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Okay. U.S. EPA, in your the chance of going into a consent decree, U.S. EPA talks about air emissions, the importance of it. Yeah. However, they are moving toward all states and territories leaning toward ultra-low sulfur diesel to be burned. But if U.S. EPA does not give the exemption to Guam, we're going to have to find a way and do something with our waste oil. Now, I do realize that GPA, EPA, and I met with you, that we're all working together to try and find a solution that stemmed from Bill 25. And I think I exhausted everything I have to say and heard everything you had to say. Madam Chair, I greatly appreciate this dialogue. It's brought this to the forefront, and that's exactly what Bill 25 is doing, to get everyone aware of this and how we're going to resolve this issue, a very important issue. But I think we should do our part on the island of Guam to be a part of clean air and emissions into our world. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I look forward to continuing to work with these agencies and everyone who's here today to testify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dunkaloo, and this is Masi, Senator Taitigui. So this concludes our section for Bill number 25-35. Thanks. Okay, I'd like to call forward those who are signed up to give testimony. So I would like to move on to our next topic. This will be the last one before lunch, so it looks like there's some requests to have a recess, and if that's okay with people that came, or we can continue on. Continue on? Okay, we'll do it till the end. So let's move on to the next item. It's Bill number 27-35, CORE, sponsored by Senator Therese Terlahi, co-sponsored by Clint Rogel and myself. And I would like to recognize the sponsor to introduce the bill.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank all of you for waiting here to testify on this bill. I appreciate your being here this morning. Sidzus Maasi, Senator Perez, for holding this public hearing on Bill 27-35. And thank you to the Guam EPA Administrator, Mr. Walter Leon Guerrero, and those who are here to provide testimony. Bill 27, if passed into law, will require the online publication of environmental violation enforcement documents and the timely reporting of these documents to the Guam EPA's Board of Directors. It will specifically mandate that all notices of violations, orders of compliance, notices of defense, voluntary compliance agreements, settlement agreements, and referrals to the Office of the Attorney General for prosecution would be published online, no later than 15 days from service, and it would be those documents will also be reported to the Board of Directors at the next scheduled regular board meeting. These documents are already public and subject to FOIA requests, as we have seen in FOIA responses from the Guam EPA. The bill would also amend, well, it would amend the enabling statutes of the EPA so that this mandate applies to all of EPA's mandates, which are very diverse, and that's the only reason the bill's long. It's because the list of the mandates under the Guam EPA are extensive. And I'll spare us from reading those right now just because of time. The bill's intent is to support the Guam EPA's efforts to increase agency transparency by allowing the public the opportunity to follow the enforcement process of violations from start to finish. I'd like to thank the administrator and the Public Information Officer, Nick Rupley, the board chairman, Bob Perron, and Guam EPA Legal Counsel, Kristen Finney, for the support, feedback, and suggestions that were provided during the draft process of this bill. And this bill was introduced last year, and we had a public hearing, and so there was some input that we have incorporated this time. I also, I am in support of the Guam EPA's efforts. Now, they and their board have adopted a policy to put these violations online. And I support this transparency and open government. I believe that if we increase, especially these regulatory agencies' transparency, we're going to build trust with the public. We are going to make it very clear that we are prioritizing active participation by the public in protecting our environment. So particularly for this agency, which we are trusting to protect our environment, but cannot do it alone, and we just heard this from the testimony in the previous bill, they absolutely cannot do it alone. So putting these things online, I'm hoping, is going to encourage the public to follow along, to be trusting of the Guam EPA, and to help the Guam EPA in its enforcement duties and reporting violations. I think that will ultimately make these agencies and their boards accountable to the level of enforcement that our entire community is depending upon. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Chalahi. So I'd like to invite our lone testifier, Nick Rupley, representing Guam EPA.
Hi, good morning, Senators. I feel like I should give you all the Cliff Notes version of the testimony. Last year in December, earlier iteration of this bill, 372-34, was supported by the agency. We made recommendations to Senator Chalahi's office about some of the things that we felt should be included. We've supported the measure since then. We've had productive discussions with her office about the format in which we are going to be reporting, publishing the notices of violation and all of the supporting documents. So we'd like to have the board give us some input on that. Senator Chalahi did cite specific examples of how other jurisdictions handled their online publication, and we are interested in kind of mirroring or adopting some of those practices. So I don't know how else to put it. We're in full support of the measure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues. To my far left, Senator Kelly Marsh, I'd like to know, do you have any questions?
Mananasi'tu'us. So not so much a question, but just a comment, and just to thank you for coming and providing this testimony. It's very reassuring, both as a citizen of this island, but also a leader, to hear of the collaboration that the senators have been working with the offices, and your offices have been working with the leadership. So, I mean, that's very reassuring to hear. It's very good to hear about the desire to voluntarily and be open to having this be mandated in law. For this transparency, it has been a problem in the past. There have been citizens that have been concerned with this. And so I just want to commend both the senators that have been involved, but also your agency for working together so well and for leading the way in many ways for this transparency.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moylan, do you have any questions? No? Senator Rogel? Okay, yes, thank you so much for testifying, and yeah, it's very sensible law, right? Let me say so myself.
You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for those that have waited all this time, and we've come to the final legislation that we're going to hear today. So I'd like to call, actually introduce my colleague who sponsored this bill. If he would like to say a few words, and I guess we can invite those that are come to testify as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce the purpose of this bill, 4635. It's to amend a current law which will increase the enforcement and collection efforts from the lodging facilities who accommodate transit visitors. The spirit of this law is to assure that the government receives its fair share of taxes from those that are unlicensed or unauthorized for conducting lodging facilities for transit visitors. As you're aware, reports have indicated that both bread and breakfast and short-term vacation rentals have dramatically grown over the years. Our residents are seeing tourists enter and leaving homes in their neighborhoods, and we see more online sites arising from advertising short-term rentals on our island. There's been media reports of 29 out of over 340 bed and breakfast and short-term vacation rentals that are not licensed with the Department of Revenue and Taxation. And previous estimates from the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association see this industry as a $20 million industry, and that could generate at least $4 million in lost revenue for our government. But we understand that to effectively enforce the laws, penalties have to be in place, stringent enough, and also possibly make it unlawful and also eliminate those that violate or remove their business license for those who violate our laws. There are three main points that this bill wants to introduce. First one, we understand it's not only vital that we increase the penalties of these illegal rentals, but we also must ensure that those found guilty are unable to conduct business on Guam for an extensive period of time. A second point is that the residents of Guam, we also need them to participate in the process to help DRT with the additional eyes and ears. We understand that these rental properties and bread and breakfasts are located from Jigo to Mauricio, and this would help DRT in identifying them. We can identify these folks as whistleblowers, and it could lead the department to help in penalizing these illegal activities and to enforce our lodging laws. This bill doesn't intend for anybody, a whistleblower, to become a trespasser, and not intended at all to endanger themselves. but basically just to obtain confidential information. The third point of this bill is to allow DRT with additional financing. Of this projected $4 million of lost revenue, this bill addresses that DRT needs money to assist in enforcing this loss, and that's why it's recommended that the department retain 10% of the excess taxes collected. They can use this money then to increase manpower and purchase necessary equipment and software to better the enforcement of this law. Madam Chair, that's the intent of this law, and I appreciate the time to present it, and I'm looking forward to our open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Moylan. So now I'd like to ask Mr. Lee if he would like to give his testimony.
Morning, Senators. My name is Sunardi Lee. I'm the president of Century Hospitality. We are small business owners operating 3 hotels, Wyndham Garden Guam, Days Inn, and also Grand Plaza Hotel. I just want to make a stand first. I'm not against short-term vacation rental, but would like to see them playing by the same level field as the rest of us. First, I'd like to present some facts. Back on January 24 this year, I searched on Agoda, which is an online travel agency, and it listed 85 hotel products on Guam, which 33 are hotels and 52 are made out of apartments or lounge concept. That's a staggering 61% that are unregulated and not paying hotel occupancy tax. In addition, if you search on, my search on Airbnb website also listed additional 285 listings. Sometime you will see over 300 listings, which I'm sure none of them are paying any taxes. I'm also baffled by how easy someone can set up a bed and breakfast place. A rundown 5 apartment units directly across my hotel at Wyndham Garden Guam was sold sometime last year, and just after a fresh coat of paint and minor renovations, business started. Operations even started before they obtained any occupancy permits and necessary inspections. Despite the outstanding job that our Guam Visitor Bureau is doing in growing our Korean market, less than 5% of my business from all my 3 hotels are generated from this market. My Korean business has not seen any growth or increase for the past 2 years. Lately, we also see there's a lounge concept which also started to develop on islands, which we see people rent a rest area, what they call a nap lounge, a 24 hours cafe where they rent resting place by block of hours. And you also have someone opening under a coffee shop concept, but they are allowed to advertise and listed on an online travel agency as a hotel products. And I don't know whether you cross the line on this thing. Anyone can just set up shop, have a couple of lounge chair, and then rented it as a hotel products. I think illegal short-term rentals not only affected the hotel business, but also created additional illegal business such as taxi company, illegal car rentals, and also tour operators. And also it did not create any additional jobs, as staffing are very limited on this bed and breakfast place, which they do not offer any housekeeping service or any front desk service like a typical hotel operations. Here's some recommendations that I think we should have done. If someone lists their apartment, house, or lounge under hotel products, they should rightfully pay for hotel occupancy tax. Enforcing regulations on Airbnb company to collect taxes, which has been done by many other countries. We need to force Airbnb website to collect hotel occupancy tax on behalf of the government of Guam. If we don't do that, they will not do it. We also need to enforce rules and regulations. I've traveled extensively and also read on other A&B laws around different countries. As an example, in Japan, they started a new law that actually limits only 180 days a year for bed and breakfast operations. Owners also need to be registered with on a government agency or enforcement agency. And I think one of the biggest problems we need to keep an eye on, if we don't limit the number of rentals, this may also create social problem on Guam. And they may actually pricing out low-income citizens out of their neighborhoods because their units will be rented by this operator and will drive the cost up of rentals. As a stakeholder, I think we all must do our part to protect the safety of our visitors and their experiences. We definitely cannot allow irresponsible business owners to devalue our reputations and product as world-class destination. Last but not least, I just want to remind everybody that tourism in Guam is everybody's business, and it is a very fragile industry. If we don't do something to regulate this, all it takes is for a guest to get hurt in this bed and breakfast place, and our tourism will suffer tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your testimony and your expertise. I would like to also, our next person who's signed up to testify is Mary Rhodes. Thank you.
Hafade, buenas. Thank you very much, honorable senators, for having us here today. My name is Mary Rhodes. I'm the president for the Guam Hotel Restaurant Association. On behalf of GHRA, our board members, and our membership, we write to express our opinion on Bill 46-35, which seeks to address the enforcement as well as the collection efforts from lodging facilities that accommodate transient visitors. The bill addresses the rising concerns of illegally operated bed and breakfasts and short-term vacation rentals, which are not fairly contributing to our economy. As the leading non-government organization, GHRA is focused on meeting its mission to advocate just legislation and work closely with our government leaders and regulatory agencies on laws and regulations that affect the industry. Comprised of more than 315 member companies, GHRA has provided previous testimonies regarding enacting legislation and promulgating rules and regulations of the short-term vacation rentals and bed and breakfasts here on Guam. With regards to taxes and penalties, GHRA agrees that penalties should be increased, but heavily enforced on those who illegally operate bed and breakfasts and short-term vacation rentals. Businesses should pay their fair share in taxes, but they should also follow the zoning as well as the licensing requirements, which include occupancy permits, fire codes, insurance, health and safety regulations, and anything else that a lodging facility should be required to maintain and subject to, including inspections that protects our local military and tourist communities. GHRA has shared in previous testimonies during Speaker Tina Munion Barnes' roundtable discussions and previous legislative hearings when she was the previous Tourism Committee chairperson and original author of the short-term vacation rental bill that was passed into law. That was several years ago. GHRA also shared support of similar legislation last year in 2018 when our current Tourism Committee chairperson, Senator Therese Terlahi, sponsored the bill to promulgate rules and regs when Department of Revenue and Taxation didn't. These efforts have kind of gone on the wayside. It's been several years. This is our third time at the table. There were also efforts to try to get Department of Revenue and Taxation to have Airbnb collect taxes online, which Mr. Lee had mentioned. But Department of Revenue and Taxation did not approve the third-party payment agreement, which is why taxes are not collected online, even though there are more than almost 400 businesses who are currently conducting business here on Guam. This is, again, the third time we have revisited this issue, and we have passed laws. We need to understand the challenges of why it's been so difficult to enact the law, and they range from enforcement, staffing issues, political will, administrative processes, and a real lack of understanding and even communications by both government as well as the business owners on what their intentions are when they go to DRT. There's a lot of confusion out there because people don't know where to start. So GHRA understands that there is a need to retain a percentage of the taxes collected, but we're concerned about not having, number one, a lockbox for these funds with the Department of Revenue and Taxation, and also whether or not 10% is nearly enough. Rather than 10% of the taxes and penalties, we should have, I think, a better understanding, clear understanding, and directive from the agency, from DRT, on what is it going to really take to strengthen the compliance department. GHRA has seen the funds related to the Responsible Alcohol Server and Seller Act, also known as RASA, not being correctly appropriated after being received by DRT to go towards the compliance department. There is already a fund that is supposed to go to the compliance department to help them. Compliance takes care of everything at DRT, not just short-term vacation rentals. RASA license fees should be directly funding the compliance department responsible for ABC laws and enforcement at DRT. Over the years, we have heard on many occasions from compliance officers that they are not receiving those funds. And they do have issues with staffing, especially some recent, as I provided testimony last year, some were retiring during the summer. So they have fewer staff. So there are issues with staffing. They've done temporary assignments within DRT directly. And also they have an issue with vehicles. Unlike Guam EPA, which had been discussed earlier, DRT's enforcement department is a 24-hour operation. They do go out during nighttime. They do go out and do nightly inspections. They also go out on the weekends. But from what I understand and what I've seen over the years, they have one vehicle for 4 officers. There needs to be at least 4 vehicles. If we're going to hire 10 officers to do this job, they need to make sure they're all properly funded for, including the vehicles and everything else that they need. We also need to look at the timing of inspections, again, during evening and weekends. These issues are not only tax-related. The issues are compounded and they're complicated, and the whole process needs to be revisited, reevaluated with DRT, as well as with the Guam Land Use Commission. GLUC has not been able to have a quorum, which is required to review variance requests for businesses who want to be properly licensed in residential zones, for example. As for the whistleblower program in this piece of legislation, GHRA understands the intent on creating a whistleblower program for island residents who report illegal lodging activity within neighborhoods. But GHRA has always been against any bill that is specifically targeting one industry or one type of business. GHRA would like to see a whistleblower program created for anything related to DRT, and also it could help with the Guam EPA that we just heard earlier testimony about illegal dumping. So a whistleblower program should be created, but it should be created under a different bill. So therefore, GHRA would like to recommend that we remove this language from the bill, we amend the language to be universal for Guam, and we create a separate bill. Today we heard about illegal dumping, like I said. This can simply be applied to any residents who want to report these situations. But we feel that adding compensation could lead to other issues, but also there's language in there currently, which I think needs to be removed, that any compensation received with government money should be tax-free and not declared income. I don't think that that should be part of DRT's mission. I think anything that anybody receives as income should be declared as income. So I think that needs to be revisited as well. The other issue that we have with the whistleblower is that it can cause safety issues. You know, we might find people following tourists with suitcases in various areas, and although the intent is there to uncover some of these things, there are safety issues, not just for the tourists, but the residents in the area, as well as possibly the individual who's following. So I think those things, this is a separate conversation and should be removed from this bill and have a different discussion. We have other concerns. Over the years, GHRA has shared our concerns about creating standards for business in the tourism industry. On 3 separate occasions, GHRA, over the last 12 years, we've been sharing with GVB our concept of creating a seal of approval. The seal of approval concept we've shared with GVB as well as certain senators over the years, and creating a standard is key to managing our destination and ensuring safe practices as well as quality for our industry. GHRA would like to see a seal of approval for Guam, working with the Guam Visitors Bureau, Guam Economic Development Authority, and also with other non-government organizations like the Guam Chamber of Commerce. We want to implement standards not just for short-term vacation rentals, but other businesses and sectors within the tourism industry. Mr. Lee had mentioned issues regarding our diving operations, our transportation companies, our taxi services, rental car, all other optional tours. We have been wanting to create a public-private partnership similar to the concept of the Better Business Bureau, or a very well-established program that GHRA has been referencing over the last decade, which serves as a great model for Guam. We are talking about Hong Kong's QSC scheme. This is something that is actually endorsed by the government. They've been very modernized. It's an app you receive on the phone, and it already clearly identifies, and it uses geolocation to help you identify the businesses, hotels, restaurants, retail outlets, optional tours, transportation, are all recognized as good businesses who have met the minimum qualifications or standards for the market that they're operating in. There are examples of hotel and guest house accommodation ordinances as well, which we would like for all of you to review. This seal of approval program will help tourists search for government-approved and private sector-endorsed businesses that meet minimum qualifications to help promote the destination, but also provide a safe environment. There are similar guidelines that have been implemented in US markets as well, like Hawaii, California, and New York. These are not additional government regulations. This would actually be more of a voluntary program that is supported by a public-private partnership, again, that establishes the guidelines for conducting business in the tourism industry. It won't be mandatory. There will be many businesses who don't want to participate. But there will be a lot of businesses who want to be part of this program and be recognized. And any monies collected from that would go to the regular audits, additional inspections, as well as the promotions of this program so that we can clearly communicate to our incoming visitors about the importance of a program and where they can go, where they can feel safe. GHRA has been planting the seed with GVB for a long time to establish these standards, which will help pave the way in developing a business improvement district in Tumon, as well as in all of the H zones that you see up at Retidian, in East Agana, as well as in Agate. We are looking at putting it within the H zones to start, but this business improvement district is actually part of our Tourism 2020 plan, which hasn't been enacted. In addition to seal of approval, GHRA would like to see government and safety information posted in public areas and/or general areas within a licensed facility in short-term vacation rentals, as well as Airbnbs, so guests can easily access and view this information in prominent places. We have had several issues recently during emergency situations and typhoon tropical conditions where tourists were not informed about safety issues. They did not get weather updates, and they don't have key information like translation services, access to counselor court office information, emergency information. GHRA has been discussing this information at our Safety and Security Committee, and we've shared it with GVB. And this committee actually includes representation from both local as well as federal government agencies and private sector. We would like to work with GVB on the design and content, which we can make available for public posting. We want this information board to serve as a guide and resource for all businesses to use, regardless if they're even a member of GHRA, GVB. We just want the information to be public so that guests know what to do during an emergency. And finally, we have the rules in the public law that requires a variance in R2 zones and that the letting of a unit is approved by a homeowners association. Those things already exist in the public law. But there are other stipulations in other markets that don't exist that Mr. Lee also referenced and we've been talking about, such as if they're going to get licensed, they should be a resident of Guam. So that way, when they are paying taxes, you know that they're paying their taxes. But they should be a resident of Guam. Also, the taxpayer should be part of the listing as part of that facility, such as being put on the deed or the title that they actually own the land or the building. And if they're renting it or leasing it out, that they have the homeowners association's approval to do so. Those property rights are really important, especially when leasing a facility. We should also require that liability insurance be covered and that also our occupancy reports are made to DRT, not just gross receipts tax and hotel occupancy tax. That should also be placed in with occupancy reports so that we can cross-reference whether or not the hotel occupancy tax matches the number of nights sold and the number of rooms occupied. GHRA would like to continue working with the 35th Guam Legislature, our executive branch, and Department of Revenue and Taxation on finally addressing the challenges as well as the issues with administering and properly procuring a license for short-term vacation rentals. GHRA has added this new category of short-term vacation rentals and Airbnb, as well as food trucks, to our membership since 2016. And we've been trying to serve as a resource for multiple short-term vacation rental companies. And we're very proud to say that we actually do have a member of that part of the community as a board member now too, because we are trying to open ourselves up and really be a great resource as a non-government organization. But more importantly, we want everybody to comply with the public law. We thank you again for your opportunity to speak on this current bill as well as previous bills on the issues. We're grateful for the opportunity to be an advocate for our tourism industry and help draft legislation that really governs the conduct of business on Guam. We are your private sector partner, and we also are your non-government organization when it comes to the tourism industry. We want to work towards compliance. We advocate on behalf of the industry, and we look forward to continuing to serve as a resource. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rhodes, for your very thorough analysis and recommendations and expertise and testimony here today. I would like to open up the floor to my colleagues. Sorry, do we have another speaker who wants to testify? Okay. Please state your name.
Half a day, Madam Chair and Senators. Yeah. I am John Cole. I am currently, thank you, Korea Guam Travel Association of Guam president right now, KGTA, also member of JGTA, Japan Guam. So I'm the only Korean guy or Korean company be on JGTA as well, So I just came down here to support Senator Moylan's bill regards to Airbnb. And then just to let you know, we have about 60 members in KGTA. Some works for hotel, owns an Airbnb, optional tour companies, travel agencies. And I've been telling them, no, this is our home, and we have to treat our tourists proper ways. Go get your business license, follow rules and regulations. So GHRA, Mary, pretty much explain, what's going on right now. So I am assuming least $8 to $10 million a month, unreported, underreported, annually $100 to $120 million. Believe it or not, senators can introduce all kinds of bills. This online, good luck if you can trace everything. Someone who operated with the websites, blogging, cafe, the bell for your bill to get success my recommendation, you guys are one who's making a bills. My recommendation, hire a research company locally. Trace optional tours, illegal taxis, Airbnbs. That's the best, get the compliance check reports. Or, I don't know, what do you call it, transition report, transit reports, whatever you want to call it. Because the GBB works really, really hard to promote our beautiful islands overseas. That's a public corporation, and these GBB staffs or related corporates, they work even after hours. Senator, tell you should know, you were there before, And here we are. We cannot even enforce illegal operations going on in Guam. Our Guam relies on tourism. Tourism pulls out, there's no gas station, no government functions, no hotels, no jobs. So, I don't know, I can turn in a testimony, in later. Probably, I recommend, as a KGTA president of Guam, there's some better ways to, enforce, proper way. We're going to hire some consultant company. How do they collect their payments? This Korean tourist comes in 700,000 plus last year. Some of them are innocent. They pay full amount on their personal account in Korea where we cannot even trace. Okay? They arrive in Guam, they ride a taxi to go Airbnb, whichever they reserve. Only thing they get is a key. Just a rental car too. Do you believe we have over 50 rental car companies in Guam? They pay in Korea. They pick them up at the airport. They go to the destination. They get the car keys. So, just give you, long story short, because I know it's a lunchtime. So, why don't rental car companies every month mandatory write their mileage on their GRT form? Some Korean Chinese tour guides, those tour vans, the tow vans, they're $60,000. I don't know how much they are reporting. They drive Lexus. Revenue and tax, DMV can pull out 2017, 2018, 2019 BMW Lexus, match their income tax. Simple as that. There's a lot of good ways, proper ways, we can do. So, I support your bill, Senator Moreland. It's a good bill that finally came out. But you can add on top of that, many other items, when you stay in, I'm not against Airbnb. When you stay in the hotel, you get full service. Emergency, medical, dining, safety. This is our guests coming to Guam. We have to protect them. Make sure if they got insurance, liability insurances, emergency contacts, that's fine. As long as they're properly registered, properly got their license, follows the rules and regulations. We don't have a problem. We don't have to introduce these bills. But some are not doing it. I came to Guam 1980 when I was 10 years old. I'm a 49, 39 years after. All my life I work in tourism. 1997, I think, when Korean Air crashed, I wasn't able to collect all my, the rental incomes from Korean tour companies. Or when I went to their office, empty. So ever since over 700,000 Koreans comes in, there's a lot of Koreans coming in from States, Korea. I mean, it's free enterprises, right? They can do whatever they want to do, But we have, just to let you know, I'm pretty sure some of you have close Korean friends. A lot of us work hard, really hard. I got 5 kids going to school, all born in Guam, working day and night. Just like you guys. Some of them comes to Guam, take advantage of us, and something happens, they leave. So I'm here to support your bill, but that's the appetizer, Senator Moylan. So you can add a couple of items. Pretty sure you can work with GHRA, whoever. And if I have a recommendation, please hire good research company, how to trace all those illegal online, incomes they're making behalf of island of Guam not reporting or underreporting. There's a lot of good Airbnb companies too, because of a bad 1-2 apples. Sometimes when I see a newspaper, right, TVs, it's like media's targeting Korean community. I'm sure they're not, but everything is Korean. But when you go public health, my daughter, passport was expired. She needs to go, college in Hawaii. So, we didn't have time, so I have to get a birth certificate. John Ko, father, born in Chuk, mom, Korean. So my daughter goes, Dad, our grandfather's Chukis? Oh, well, I mean, I guess, that's Guam, right? So I told her, it's okay. At least you can get on the flight. I haven't fixed it yet. I haven't fixed it yet, But, we have a couple of good, nonprofit organizations, right? GHRA, JGTA, KGTA. I think, with your support, I think we can work harder, and we can enforce a lot of these illegal operations. Make sure, everyone properly get their licenses and operate like American citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do want to ask that you can sign in so that we can contact you to kind of enact some of those recommendations.
Sure.
For now, I would like to open the floor to my colleagues for questions. So starting from my far right, Senator Rajel. Do you have any questions? Vice Speaker Nelson, questions? Senator Tulahi.
I only want to thank you for your testimony, very helpful, and I really appreciate you spending the time here, and all the efforts, very thorough testimony. But my concern, Madam Chair, is that this program depends on the Department of Revenue and Taxation. They are not here today, and I would ask that we get input from them, or it seems like we're going around in circles if we're going to try to collect and we can't get on the same page with the Department of Revenue and Taxation, whose job it is to enforce these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that point, and I will organize a group to focus on this issue. Sorry, Senator Moylan, did you have anything? Senator Taitugui?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank you for coming to testify today. Mary, I'm surprised you didn't go to 7 pages. I know you could, but it's a wealth of knowledge. I just asked, Madam Chair, if we can also get your testimony as well. I didn't get a copy of your testimony. And thank you, John Ko. You're a wealth of knowledge here and a local boy. So thank you coming and testifying in support of our island and keeping it clean and real. Okay. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Before we conclude, I'm sorry, do you have any questions, Senator Moylan? I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Rhodes, Mr. Lee, and Mr. Ko, thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Ko, I like what you said there. This bill does sound like an appetizer for now, and all the special points that you folks have brought out, this legislature, I'm sure, wants to do the best we can to ensure that all those items are addressed. So as we work together, we for sure will bring this back to committee and make sure we address those concerns. We do want to help DRT to enforce these laws, and by helping them and collecting all this money that is out there, it can probably help that department in total to really look at a whole bunch of other things in collection for those that are not being rightful and just compared to those that are doing the right things and making a difference in the island. So I do appreciate your time, and for sure, especially this brand new body here, over 8 new ones, we're excited and anxious to make things right for the island. We know we only got a couple of years, even though I know you've been doing this since 2015, 17, and 18. I hope you can rest assured that with this body and the 35th Guam Legislature, we'll work closely with our executive branch and our directors to make the island right and to make the island beautiful for our tourism too. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Moylan, for those words, and I do concur with what you just said. Before we conclude, I would like to reiterate that the committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. on Monday, March 18, 2019. Please address testimony to Senator Sabina Flores-Perez, Chairperson, Committee on Environment, Revenue, Taxation, and Procurement, and it can be dropped off at the mailboxes here at the legislature or emailed at office@senatorperez.org. Dankalu and Azuzmasi for all of you that have come here today and have stuck it out all this time. Have a great day.